Funeral service. Those two solemn words mark when my world shattered. Not from grief alone, but from discovering my grandchildren, Emma, 24-year-old female, and Lucas, 22-year-old male, had robbed my home during my wife Margaret's funeral, stealing her jewelry collection, worth over $150,000 that I'd planned to distribute as her final gifts to family. Margaret and I were married 58 years. She passed 3 months ago after battling cancer, and I was devastated. We'd raised 3 children together, had 7 grandchildren, and Margaret had been my entire world. She spent her final months carefully planning how to distribute her possessions, particularly her jewelry collection she'd accumulated over decades. Margaret's jewelry wasn't just valuable monetarily. Each piece held memories. The sapphire necklace I'd given her on our 25th anniversary. The pearl earrings from our children when our first grandchild was born. The diamond bracelet she'd inherited from her own grandmother. She'd created a detailed plan for distributing pieces to our daughters, daughters-in-law, and granddaughters, wanting each woman to have something meaningful. The day of Margaret's funeral, our entire family gathered at the church. Emma and Lucas, my son David's children, were notably absent from the service. David explained they were running late and would meet us at the reception afterward. I was hurt, but tried to focus on honoring Margaret's memory. After the service, we gathered at our home for the reception. Emma and Lucas arrived about an hour into the gathering, apologizing for missing the funeral with vague excuses about car trouble. Something felt wrong about their demeanor. They seemed nervous and kept glancing at each other. The next morning, I went to Margaret's bedroom to begin the difficult task of organizing her belongings. I opened her jewelry box to review the distribution plan she'd written. The box was empty. Every piece was gone. $150,000 worth of jewelry accumulated over 58 years, each item carrying profound, sentimental value beyond its monetary worth. I searched frantically, thinking perhaps I'd moved the jewelry somewhere for safekeeping and forgotten in my grief. But I knew the truth. Someone had taken it during the funeral, and Emma and Lucas's absence from the service suddenly made horrifying sense. I called David and confronted him. Initially defensive, he eventually admitted Emma and Lucas had confessed to taking the jewelry. They'd used keys they'd copied years ago when they'd house-sat for us. While the family mourned Margaret at her funeral, Emma and Lucas had driven to our home, let themselves in, and systematically emptied her jewelry box. David tried to minimize their actions, saying they'd panicked about inheritance and had made a mistake. He promised they'd return the jewelry if I didn't involve police. But when I demanded immediate return, David admitted Emma had already sold several pieces to pawn shops and online buyers. The betrayal cut deeper than the theft itself. These were grandchildren Margaret had loved deeply, had helped raise, had planned to honor with her jewelry. She'd specifically designated pieces for Emma, a pearl necklace Emma had always admired, and Emma had responded to that love by stealing from her grandmother's home during her funeral. I reported the theft to police. Emma and Lucas were arrested and charged with felony burglary. David was furious, accusing me of destroying the family by involving law enforcement. He said I was choosing material objects over my grandchildren. But this wasn't about objects. It was about honoring Margaret's memory and her wishes. She'd spent her final months carefully planning how to distribute her jewelry meaningfully. Emma and Lucas had stolen not just valuable items, but Margaret's final act of love toward her family. The criminal proceedings revealed Emma and Lucas had substantial debt: student loans, credit cards, and personal loans. They'd planned the theft deliberately, timing it for the funeral when they knew I'd be away from home. They'd researched jewelry values and had prepared to sell everything quickly. Some pieces were recovered from pawn shops. Others had been sold online and couldn't be traced. Margaret's sapphire necklace, the one I'd given her on our 25th anniversary, was gone forever. Sold to an online buyer we couldn't locate. Emma and Lucas pled guilty and received probation plus restitution orders. But the financial repayment couldn't restore what was truly lost: Margaret's carefully planned legacy and the family trust they'd destroyed. David has cut contact with me, saying I've torn the family apart with my vindictiveness. My other children support my decision to prosecute, but are devastated by the family fracture. Margaret's funeral, meant to be a celebration of her life, became the day our family shattered. 3 months later, I have the recovered jewelry pieces, but can't bring myself to distribute them as Margaret planned. The theft has tainted everything. Every time I look at the pieces, I remember Emma and Lucas rifling through Margaret's belongings while we mourned her. I question whether prosecuting them was right. They're young, made terrible choices, and now have criminal records that will affect their futures. But they violated Margaret's memory at her most vulnerable moment. They exploited family trust and our grief for financial gain. Margaret would have been heartbroken to see our family destroyed this way. I don't know if I honored her memory by seeking justice or dishonored it by breaking the family apart. The jewelry sits in a safe, undistributed, a painful reminder of love and betrayal, intertwined in ways I'll never fully reconcile. My granddaughter's documentary about my life was actually elder abuse content. Documentary project. Those two creative words concealed the most humiliating exploitation. My granddaughter, Zoe, 26-year-old female, wasn't creating a heartfelt film about my life as she claimed, but was actually recording and posting videos of me struggling with daily tasks to a social media account mocking elderly people. And I, 79-year-old male, only discovered the truth when a former colleague's grandson recognized me in a viral video titled, "Grandpa Can't Work His Phone, LOL." Zoe approached me 18 months ago with what seemed like a touching idea. She was studying film production and wanted to create a documentary about my life, my career as an engineer, my experiences in the Korean War, my 52-year marriage to her late grandmother. She said documenting my stories would preserve family history and serve as her senior thesis project. I was honored and moved by Zoe's interest. So many young people showed no curiosity about their grandparents' lives, but Zoe wanted to spend time recording my memories and experiences. We began filming sessions twice weekly. She'd bring cameras and lighting equipment, ask questions about my past, and film me discussing various life experiences. As filming progressed, Zoe expanded the project. She said her professors were impressed and wanted day-in-the-life footage showing my current routines, not just historical interviews. She started filming me doing everyday activities, making breakfast, using my computer, gardening, going to medical appointments. I felt slightly uncomfortable being recorded doing mundane tasks, but Zoe assured me this cinematic verite approach was standard in documentary filmmaking. Zoe was always encouraging during filming, though sometimes she'd ask me to repeat tasks if I struggled. "Try opening that jar again, Grandpa. I didn't get good footage the first time." Or, "Can you try setting up your email one more time? The lighting was off." I'd comply, assuming she needed quality footage for her thesis. Then my former engineering colleague Bill called, upset and confused. His grandson had shown him a social media video of me struggling to use my smartphone, posted to an account with 340,000 followers that mocked elderly people's difficulties with technology. The video was titled, "Boomer Grandpa Can't Figure Out How Apps Work," and had 2.3 million views with thousands of comments ridiculing my confusion. I was horrified and certain there was a mistake. Maybe someone had stolen Zoe's footage. But Bill sent me the account link. It was called Elder Fails, and featured hundreds of videos of elderly people struggling with various tasks, technology, modern slang, physical activities, all presented mockingly with insulting captions and commentary. Dozens of the videos featured me. Clips from our documentary sessions, edited to emphasize my struggles and confusion. Me failing to understand smartphone apps. Me having difficulty opening jars due to arthritis. Me confused by modern music references. Me struggling to remember passwords. Each video had degrading captions and had been viewed millions of times collectively. The comments were cruel beyond imagination. Strangers mocked my appearance, my cognitive abilities, my physical limitations. They made jokes about nursing homes and death. They called me slurs related to age and disability. Thousands of people had watched me struggle with daily tasks and had responded with mockery rather than empathy. Zoe had been systematically recording my difficulties and vulnerabilities, deliberately asking me to repeat tasks I struggled with to get better footage, and posting everything to a viral social media account that existed purely to mock elderly people. The documentary about my life had been entirely fabricated. She'd been exploiting me for social media content and advertising revenue. I confronted Zoe with the evidence. She initially tried to claim someone had hacked her footage, but quickly admitted the truth when I showed her the account with her name listed as creator. She said she'd needed content to grow her social media following, and that videos of elderly people struggling were really popular. She claimed she'd planned to tell me eventually, but wanted to wait until the account was monetized. Zoe had earned approximately $15,000 from advertising revenue on videos exploiting my struggles and vulnerabilities. She'd built a following of hundreds of thousands by posting content that presented elderly people, including her own grandfather, as objects of mockery. She deliberately recorded my most difficult and embarrassing moments to maximize engagement. I reported Zoe to social media platforms for posting non-consensual videos and elder exploitation. Most platforms removed the content, though it had already been downloaded and shared extensively. I filed police reports for elder abuse and invasion of privacy. I also sued Zoe civilly for emotional distress and misappropriation of my image. Zoe's university learned about the situation through media coverage and expelled her from the film program for ethical violations. Creating exploitative content targeting vulnerable populations violated academic ethics codes. Her senior thesis was rejected, and her academic reputation was destroyed. The civil lawsuit resulted in Zoe being ordered to pay $45,000, the advertising revenue plus damages for emotional distress. She was also banned from posting any content featuring me and required to issue public apology statements on her social media accounts. But legal consequences couldn't undo the humiliation. Millions of people had watched videos of me struggling with tasks, had laughed at my difficulties, had mocked my age-related limitations. Former colleagues, friends, and acquaintances had potentially seen this content. The dignity I'd maintained through 79 years was destroyed by my granddaughter's exploitation. My family was divided by the situation. Zoe's mother, my daughter Melissa, 54 female, was horrified and supported my legal actions. But Zoe's father, Keith, 56-year male, accused me of overreacting and destroying his daughter's career over harmless comedy content. He claimed everyone films their grandparents doing funny things and that I was being too sensitive. This response revealed how normalized elder mockery has become. My son-in-law genuinely believed posting videos of elderly people struggling with daily tasks, presented with degrading captions for millions to mock, was harmless comedy. The cultural devaluation of elderly people's dignity had progressed to where even family members saw exploitation as entertainment. 18 months later, most videos have been removed from major platforms, but they've been downloaded and reshared on sites I can't control. I occasionally discover my image in funny elderly people compilations. Strangers occasionally recognize me in public from the viral videos. The humiliation is permanent. My relationship with Zoe is destroyed beyond repair. She showed no genuine remorse, only anger that her successful content strategy had consequences. She's tried rebuilding her social media presence, but struggles because the elder abuse scandal damaged her reputation among ethical content creators. I've questioned whether pursuing legal action was right, given its impact on Zoe's education and career. But what she did was elder abuse, systematic exploitation of my vulnerabilities for profit and entertainment. She violated my privacy, dignity, and trust during what I thought were meaningful bonding experiences. Those violations warranted consequences, even if they permanently damaged our relationship and her professional prospects. Home care. Those two comforting words masked the cruelest betrayal. My daughter-in-law, Patricia, 42-year-old female, wasn't helping me recover from my stroke as she claimed, but was systematically draining my bank accounts while I trusted her completely. And I, 76-year-old male, only discovered the truth when my financial advisor noticed suspicious withdrawals totaling $340,000. After my stroke 18 months ago, I needed help managing daily activities. My son, Robert, 45-year-old male, and Patricia offered to have me move into their guest house while I recovered. They'd handle my medications, appointments, meals, and finances until I regained independence. I was grateful for their generosity and moved in immediately. Patricia was attentive and caring during my recovery. She'd bring meals, help with physical therapy exercises, drive me to medical appointments, and manage my bills and banking since my right-hand mobility was limited. She'd show me statements monthly, explaining what bills had been paid and how much remained in my accounts. I trusted Patricia completely. She was my son's wife of 20 years, the mother of my 3 grandchildren. She seemed genuinely invested in my recovery and well-being. When she suggested I add her as a joint account holder to simplify bill paying, I agreed without hesitation. My recovery progressed well. After 6 months, I'd regained most of my mobility and independence. But Patricia encouraged me to stay in the guest house longer, saying she enjoyed having me close and wanted to ensure I was fully stable before living alone. I appreciated her concern and stayed. Then my financial advisor called, requesting an urgent meeting. He'd noticed unusual withdrawal patterns from my accounts, large cash withdrawals, transfers to unfamiliar accounts, and expenditures inconsistent with my lifestyle. Over 16 months, approximately $340,000 had disappeared from accounts that should have contained nearly $500,000. I was confused and initially defensive, certain there was administrative error. But my advisor showed me transaction records. The withdrawals and transfers had all been made by Patricia using her joint account access. Cash withdrawals of $5,000 to $10,000 weekly. Large transfers to accounts in Patricia's name. Online purchases for luxury items shipped to addresses I didn't recognize. Patricia had been systematically stealing from me for 16 months. The bills she claimed to be paying were real, but she'd also been draining my accounts for personal use. The monthly statements she'd shown me were falsified documents she'd created to hide the theft. I confronted Patricia with the evidence. She initially denied everything, claiming the advisor was mistaken. But faced with specific transaction records, she eventually admitted taking the money. She claimed Robert had lost his job. A lie. I verified he was still employed, and they'd been desperate. She said she'd planned to repay everything and had only borrowed what she needed. Her explanations were absurd. She'd stolen $340,000 over 16 months while pretending to care for me. She'd exploited my stroke recovery and my trust in family. She'd falsified financial documents to keep me unaware, while systematically draining accounts I'd spent 50 years building. I reported Patricia to police for elder financial abuse and fraud. She was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. Robert was devastated, claiming he'd known nothing about the theft. He filed for divorce immediately, horrified by what his wife had done to his father. The investigation revealed Patricia had used my money for vacations, luxury purchases, gambling, and paying off personal credit card debt. She'd lived extravagantly, while I believed my finances were being carefully managed during my vulnerable recovery period. Robert's family fractured completely. My grandchildren were traumatized, learning their mother had stolen from their grandfather. Robert faced financial devastation from the divorce and from having to sell their home to begin repaying what Patricia had stolen. Patricia pled guilty and received a 4-year prison sentence plus restitution orders. But much of the money is unrecoverable, spent on experiences, gambling losses, and purchases that have depreciated. I'll likely recover less than half of what she stole. The betrayal devastated me more than the financial loss. I'd trusted Patricia during my most vulnerable time. I'd believed she cared about my well-being. She'd exploited my stroke recovery and my love for my son's family to commit systematic theft while presenting herself as my devoted caregiver. My relationship with Robert has survived, but is strained. He feels tremendous guilt for bringing Patricia into my life and for not noticing her theft sooner. My grandchildren are in therapy, processing their mother's incarceration and the family destruction. I've recovered financially enough to live independently, but I've lost something irreplaceable: the ability to trust family caregivers. I now hire professional help for everything, unwilling to risk similar betrayal. The stroke took my physical mobility temporarily. Patricia's betrayal took my trust permanently. I question whether prosecuting her was right, given the impact on my grandchildren. But elder financial abuse is serious, and Patricia showed no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. She exploited the most vulnerable time of my life for personal gain. That can't be forgiven, even if it means my grandchildren suffer the consequences of their mother's crimes. Memory problems. Those two frightening words became my son Gerald's, 48M, weapon to destroy me. He wasn't helping me cope with cognitive decline as he claimed, but was deliberately gaslighting me into believing I had dementia so he could take control of my $2.3 million farm and equipment business, and I, 72-year-old female, only discovered his scheme when my actual doctor called, wondering why I'd missed my routine physical. I've owned and operated Hillside Farm Equipment for 40 years. My late husband and I built the business from nothing, and after he passed 8 years ago, I continued running it successfully. The business was thriving, annual revenue around $800,000, property value approximately $1.5 million, loyal customer base throughout our rural county. About 2 years ago, Gerald started expressing concern about my memory. He'd visit and claim I'd forgotten conversations we'd had, or appointments I'd supposedly missed. He'd say I'd left the stove on or forgotten to lock doors. Initially, I brushed it off as normal aging, but Gerald's concerns became more frequent and alarming. Gerald suggested I see a neurologist about possible dementia. He even found a specialist, Dr. Harrison, and scheduled appointments. I attended several sessions where Dr. Harrison performed cognitive tests and confirmed Gerald's fears. I was showing early-stage dementia and needed family support managing my affairs before my condition worsened. Devastated and frightened, I agreed when Gerald suggested he take over managing the farm business temporarily until we understood my prognosis better. I signed power of attorney documents, transferred business management to Gerald, and stepped back from day-to-day operations, believing I was protecting the business I'd spent decades building. Gerald immediately restructured everything. He moved the business bank accounts to his sole control, changed vendor relationships, and began making decisions without consulting me. When I questioned his choices, He'd gently remind me about my memory issues and suggest I was confused. I'd doubt myself and withdraw, trusting Gerald was protecting our family legacy. Then my longtime physician, Dr. Chen, who I'd seen for 25 years, called asking why I'd missed my annual physical. I explained I'd been seeing Dr. Harrison for dementia treatment. Dr. Chen was confused and said she had no referral records for any neurologist. She asked for Dr. Harrison's contact information to coordinate care. I gave her the information Gerald had provided. Dr. Chen called back within hours, deeply concerned. The address was for a chiropractor's office, not a neurologist. There was no Dr. Harrison practicing neurology in our state. The medical office, where I'd attended appointments, was actually a rented office space Gerald had been leasing monthly. Dr. Chen insisted I come in immediately for cognitive screening. Her comprehensive evaluation found zero evidence of dementia or cognitive decline. My memory, reasoning, and mental function were completely normal for my age. There was nothing wrong with me. The realization hit like physical violence. Gerald had fabricated my dementia diagnosis completely. He'd rented office space, hired someone to pose as a neurologist, and had systematically convinced me I was losing my mind to gain control of my business and property. I reviewed the power of attorney documents I'd signed with a real attorney. Gerald had used my supposed cognitive decline to gain complete control over my business, property, and financial accounts. He'd already transferred $180,000 from business accounts to his personal accounts, had taken loans against the property, and had begun negotiating to sell the business to a competitor. I reported Gerald to police for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. The investigation uncovered his elaborate scheme. He'd paid an actor $500 per session to pose as Dr. Harrison, had rented office space and staged it to look like a medical facility, and had created fake medical documents diagnosing me with dementia. Gerald's motivation was purely financial. He'd accumulated massive gambling debts, over $400,000, and had been desperate for money. Rather than asking for help, he'd chosen to destroy his mother's mental health and steal the business she'd spent her life building. The person posing as Dr. Harrison was arrested and cooperated fully with prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about Gerald's scheme. Gerald was charged with multiple felonies: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, practicing medicine without a license, and theft. Gerald pled guilty to avoid trial and received a 6-year prison sentence. The court ordered him to repay everything he'd stolen, though the gambling debts mean I'll likely never recover the full amount. The power of attorney was immediately revoked, and I regained full control of my business. But the damage extended beyond financial theft. For 18 months, I'd believed I had dementia. I'd withdrawn from friends and community activities, convinced I was losing myself to cognitive decline. I'd grieved the person I thought I was losing, had prepared for institutional care, had suffered profound psychological trauma from believing my mind was deteriorating. My relationship with my daughter Susan, 45-year-old female, was also damaged. She'd sided with Gerald initially, believing his concerns about my health were genuine. When the fraud was exposed, Susan was devastated by guilt for not questioning Gerald's claims more carefully. Our relationship is slowly rebuilding, but the trust was fractured. Most painfully, I now question every memory and every decision. Gerald's gaslighting was so effective that even knowing the truth, I sometimes doubt myself. Did I actually forget that conversation, or is this normal memory variation? Am I making good business decisions, or am I missing something? The psychological scars from believing I had dementia persist even after learning it was fabricated. My business has recovered financially, but I've lost something irreplaceable: the confidence I had in my own mind. Gerald didn't just steal money. He stole my trust in my own cognitive function and made me doubt reality itself. That violation was more devastating than any financial theft. and I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from what he did to my sense of self. My daughter convinced me to reverse mortgage my home, then abandoned me. Homeless. Reverse mortgage. Those two financial words became my daughter Teresa's 51-year-old weapon for theft. She wasn't helping me access retirement funds as she claimed, but was convincing me to sign over my home equity so she could collect $380,000 while abandoning me to foreclosure. And I, 77-year-old male, only discovered the betrayal when the mortgage company sent eviction notice because Teresa had stopped making required property tax payments. I'd owned my home for 42 years, a modest 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly in value. The property was worth approximately $480,000 fully paid off, representing my life's major financial asset and the security I'd need in my final years. Teresa approached me about 2 years ago with what she presented as a financial solution. She explained that reverse mortgages allow seniors to access their home equity while continuing to live in the property. She said I could get a substantial loan against my home's value, receive monthly payments or a lump sum, and never have to repay as long as I lived there. Teresa painted it as ideal for my situation. I could access funds for medical expenses, home improvements, and better quality of life during retirement. The house would eventually go to the bank after my death rather than to heirs, but Teresa insisted she didn't care about inheritance. She wanted me to enjoy my final years comfortably. I was hesitant initially, uncomfortable with debt at my age, but Teresa was persistent, saying the reverse mortgage would provide financial security without requiring me to sell my home or move. She offered to help with all paperwork and coordinate with lenders, making the process easy for me. Teresa arranged meetings with a reverse mortgage company she'd researched. The loan officer explained I could borrow up to 80% of my home's value, approximately $380,000. I'd receive the full amount up front, could live in the house as long as I wanted, and would only need to maintain property taxes and homeowners insurance as ongoing obligations. The deal seemed straightforward, and with Teresa's encouragement, I signed the paperwork. The $380,000 was deposited into a new bank account Teresa had helped me open, supposedly to manage the funds properly and ensure I didn't spend recklessly. Teresa had herself added as joint account holder to help manage the money and ensure bills were paid. She said she'd take care of property taxes and insurance from the reverse mortgage funds, so I wouldn't need to worry about administration. I trusted her completely and appreciated her help. Over the following 18 months, Teresa assured me the funds were being managed properly. She'd show me occasional statements indicating money remained in the account, though the balances seemed to decrease faster than I expected, given I was hardly spending anything. Then, 14 months after signing the reverse mortgage, I received a certified letter from the mortgage company. I was in default due to unpaid property taxes for 2 years totaling $18,000. The letter stated that failure to cure the default within 90 days would result in foreclosure proceedings. I was confused and panicked. Teresa had been handling property tax payments from the reverse mortgage funds specifically to avoid this problem. I called her immediately, and she said it must be administrative error. She'd paid the taxes and would straighten it out with the county. But weeks passed with no resolution. I received another notice from the mortgage company stating foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days. I went to the county tax office myself and discovered no property tax payments had been made for 2 years. The house had nearly $20,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. I checked the bank account containing the reverse mortgage funds. The balance was $3,200. Nearly all $380,000 had been withdrawn over 18 months. I reviewed transaction history and found Teresa had been systematically draining the account. Large transfers to her personal accounts, cash withdrawals, purchases on a debit card she'd obtained for the account. Teresa had stolen virtually all the reverse mortgage money, while lying about managing property taxes and insurance. She'd left me with massive unpaid tax debt that would trigger foreclosure of my home. When I confronted Teresa with bank statements, she initially claimed the expenses were legitimate costs for my care and home maintenance. But the transactions showed luxury purchases, vacation rentals, electronics, and transfers to her accounts. Nothing related to my care or property maintenance. Eventually, Teresa admitted she'd taken the money and spent it. She said she'd been desperate due to her own financial problems and had planned to repay before taxes became overdue. She claimed she'd lost track of time and didn't realize the tax deadline had passed. Teresa's explanations were pathetic. She'd stolen $377,000 from the reverse mortgage intended to provide my retirement security. She deliberately neglected property tax payments to continue spending. Now my home faced foreclosure because she'd stolen the funds designated for maintaining it. I reported Teresa to law enforcement for elder financial abuse and theft. The investigation confirmed systematic theft. Teresa had emptied the account through transfers and purchases benefiting only herself, had ignored property tax obligations she'd promised to handle, and had lied repeatedly about the account status. Teresa was charged with multiple felonies and pled guilty to elder abuse and grand theft. She received 5 years in prison, plus restitution orders for $380,000. However, she'd already spent the money and had no assets. Actual restitution would be minimal. Meanwhile, I faced immediate foreclosure. The reverse mortgage company wasn't sympathetic to my victimization. I'd signed the loan documents, and the property tax requirement was my legal obligation regardless of who'd stolen the funds. They proceeded with foreclosure. I hired attorneys who negotiated with the mortgage company. They agreed to delay foreclosure if I could cure the tax default. Family members and friends contributed to a fundraising campaign that eventually raised $24,000 to pay back taxes and penalties. The foreclosure was averted, but I now lived in the home with the reverse mortgage debt and virtually no remaining equity. My relationship with Teresa is destroyed permanently. She'd convinced me to take a reverse mortgage specifically so she could steal the proceeds while pretending to manage the funds. She'd put my housing security at direct risk while living comfortably off stolen money. Teresa's children, my grandchildren ages 15 and 12, lost their relationship with their mother during her incarceration. They live with their father now and have struggled with the shame and trauma of their mother's crimes. My relationship with them survived, but carries the weight of Teresa's betrayal. Some family members questioned whether I should have prosecuted Teresa, given the impact on her children. But she'd committed serious elder abuse that nearly rendered me homeless at 77. Those crimes warranted prosecution, regardless of consequences for her family. Consequences that resulted from her choices, not mine. The reverse mortgage now burdens me until death. I can live in the house but have no equity to access in emergencies. When I die, the bank will claim the property. My other children will inherit nothing from the house I'd spent 42 years paying off. All because Teresa stole the equity and forced me into this situation. I'm 78 now, living in a house I own in name only. The reverse mortgage looms over everything. I must maintain taxes and insurance meticulously or face foreclosure. One financial setback could render me homeless. The security I'd built through decades of mortgage payments was destroyed by my daughter's theft. The $380,000 Teresa stole would have funded my care for my remaining years comfortably. Instead, I live with financial anxiety, no home equity, and the knowledge that my daughter valued luxury purchases more than her father's housing security. She risked making me homeless at 77 for vacations and electronics. Friends who'd contributed to the tax fundraising saved my home, but I carry guilt about accepting their help for debt that resulted from my daughter's crime. I feel foolish for trusting Teresa with the reverse mortgage funds and ashamed that my family's dysfunction became public through the fundraising campaign. The stolen equity represented 42 years of labor and sacrifice to own my home outright. That equity should have provided security and eventual inheritance for my children. Instead, Teresa took everything, nearly made me homeless, and left me with debt that will consume my estate. That betrayal is permanent and unforgivable. Teresa will serve 5 years in prison making minimal restitution payments. She destroyed her relationship with her father and children, her freedom, and her integrity for money she's already spent. Those consequences will follow her for life. But they can't restore what she stole: my home equity, my financial security, and my peace of mind in my final years. My daughter convinced me to reverse mortgage my home, then abandoned me. Homeless. Reverse mortgage. Those two financial words became my daughter Teresa's 51-year-old weapon for theft. She wasn't helping me access retirement funds as she claimed, but was convincing me to sign over my home equity so she could collect $380,000 while abandoning me to foreclosure. And I, 77-year-old male, only discovered the betrayal when the mortgage company sent eviction notice because Teresa had stopped making required property tax payments. I'd owned my home for 42 years, a modest 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly in value. The property was worth approximately $480,000 fully paid off, representing my life's major financial asset and the security I'd need in my final years. Teresa approached me about 2 years ago with what she presented as a financial solution. She explained that reverse mortgages allow seniors to access their home equity while continuing to live in the property. She said I could get a substantial loan against my home's value, receive monthly payments or a lump sum, and never have to repay as long as I lived there. Teresa painted it as ideal for my situation. I could access funds for medical expenses, home improvements, and better quality of life during retirement. The house would eventually go to the bank after my death rather than to heirs, but Teresa insisted she didn't care about inheritance. She wanted me to enjoy my final years comfortably. I was hesitant initially, uncomfortable with debt at my age, but Teresa was persistent, saying the reverse mortgage would provide financial security without requiring me to sell my home or move. She offered to help with all paperwork and coordinate with lenders, making the process easy for me. Teresa arranged meetings with a reverse mortgage company she'd researched. The loan officer explained I could borrow up to 80% of my home's value, approximately $380,000. I'd receive the full amount up front, could live in the house as long as I wanted, and would only need to maintain property taxes and homeowner's insurance as ongoing obligations. The deal seemed straightforward, and with Teresa's encouragement, I signed the paperwork. The $380,000 was deposited into a new bank account Teresa had helped me open, supposedly to manage the funds properly and ensure I didn't spend recklessly. Teresa had herself added as joint account holder to help manage the money and ensure bills were paid. She said she'd take care of property taxes and insurance from the reverse mortgage funds, so I wouldn't need to worry about administration. I trusted her completely and appreciated her help. Over the following 18 months, Teresa assured me the funds were being managed properly. She'd show me occasional statements indicating money remained in the account, though the balances seemed to decrease faster than I expected, given I was hardly spending anything. Then, 14 months after signing the reverse mortgage, I received a certified letter from the mortgage company. I was in default due to unpaid property taxes for 2 years totaling $18,000. The letter stated that failure to cure the default within 90 days would result in foreclosure proceedings. I was confused and panicked. Teresa had been handling property tax payments from the reverse mortgage funds specifically to avoid this problem. I called her immediately, and she said it must be administrative error. She'd paid the taxes and would straighten it out with the county. But weeks passed with no resolution. I received another notice from the mortgage company stating foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days. I went to the county tax office myself and discovered no property tax payments had been made for 2 years. The house had nearly $20,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. I checked the bank account containing the reverse mortgage funds. The balance was $3,200. Nearly all $380,000 had been withdrawn over 18 months. I reviewed transaction history and found Teresa had been systematically draining the account. Large transfers to her personal accounts, cash withdrawals, purchases on a debit card she'd obtained for the account. Teresa had stolen virtually all the reverse mortgage money, while lying about managing property taxes and insurance. She'd left me with massive unpaid tax debt that would trigger foreclosure of my home. When I confronted Teresa with bank statements, she initially claimed the expenses were legitimate costs for my care and home maintenance. But the transactions showed luxury purchases, vacation rentals, electronics, and transfers to her accounts. Nothing related to my care or property maintenance. Eventually, Teresa admitted she'd taken the money and spent it. She said she'd been desperate due to her own financial problems and had planned to repay before taxes became overdue. She claimed she'd lost track of time and didn't realize the tax deadline had passed. Teresa's explanations were pathetic. She'd stolen $377,000 from the reverse mortgage intended to provide my retirement security. She deliberately neglected property tax payments to continue spending. Now my home faced foreclosure because she'd stolen the funds designated for maintaining it. I reported Teresa to law enforcement for elder financial abuse and theft. The investigation confirmed systematic theft. Teresa had emptied the account through transfers and purchases benefiting only herself, had ignored property tax obligations she'd promised to handle, and had lied repeatedly about the account status. Teresa was charged with multiple felonies and pled guilty to elder abuse and grand theft. She received 5 years in prison, plus restitution orders for $380,000. However, she'd already spent the money and had no assets. Actual restitution would be minimal. Meanwhile, I faced immediate foreclosure. The reverse mortgage company wasn't sympathetic to my victimization. I'd signed the loan documents, and the property tax requirement was my legal obligation regardless of who'd stolen the funds. They proceeded with foreclosure. I hired attorneys who negotiated with the mortgage company. They agreed to delay foreclosure if I could cure the tax default. Family members and friends contributed to a fundraising campaign that eventually raised $24,000 to pay back taxes and penalties. The foreclosure was averted, but I now lived in the home with the reverse mortgage debt and virtually no remaining equity. My relationship with Teresa is destroyed permanently. She'd convinced me to take a reverse mortgage specifically so she could steal the proceeds while pretending to manage the funds. She'd put my housing security at direct risk while living comfortably off stolen money. Teresa's children, my grandchildren ages 15 and 12, lost their relationship with their mother during her incarceration. They live with their father now and have struggled with the shame and trauma of their mother's crimes. My relationship with them survived, but carries the weight of Teresa's betrayal. Some family members questioned whether I should have prosecuted Teresa, given the impact on her children. But she'd committed serious elder abuse that nearly rendered me homeless at 77. Those crimes warranted prosecution, regardless of consequences for her family. Consequences that resulted from her choices, not mine. The reverse mortgage now burdens me until death. I can live in the house but have no equity to access in emergencies. When I die, the bank will claim the property. My other children will inherit nothing from the house I'd spent 42 years paying off. All because Teresa stole the equity and forced me into this situation. I'm 78 now, living in a house I own in name only. The reverse mortgage looms over everything. I must maintain taxes and insurance meticulously or face foreclosure. One financial setback could render me homeless. The security I'd built through decades of mortgage payments was destroyed by my daughter's theft. The $380,000 Teresa stole would have funded my care for my remaining years comfortably. Instead, I live with financial anxiety, no home equity, and the knowledge that my daughter valued luxury purchases more than her father's housing security. She risked making me homeless at 77 for vacations and electronics. Friends who'd contributed to the tax fundraising saved my home, but I carry guilt about accepting their help for debt that resulted from my daughter's crime. I feel foolish for trusting Teresa with the reverse mortgage funds and ashamed that my family's dysfunction became public through the fundraising campaign. The stolen equity represented 42 years of labor and sacrificed to own my home outright. That equity should have provided security and eventual inheritance for my children. Instead, Teresa took everything, nearly made me homeless, and left me with debt that will consume my estate. That betrayal is permanent and unforgivable. Teresa will serve 5 years in prison, making minimal restitution payments. She destroyed her relationship with her father and children, her freedom, and her integrity for money she's already spent. Those consequences will follow her for life. But they can't restore what she stole: my home equity, my financial security, and my peace of mind in my final years. My daughter stole my late husband's rare coin collection from our safety deposit box bank visit. Those 2 innocent words concealed my daughter Lydia's 50 feel most calculating theft. She wasn't accompanying me to the bank for routine errands, as she claimed, but was using copied safety deposit box keys to steal my late husband Walter's rare coin collection worth $430,000 that he'd spent 38 years assembling. And I, 75 feel, only discovered the theft when I went to show the collection to my grandson, who'd expressed interest in numismatics. Walter passed away 18 months ago after a brief illness. We'd been married 51 years, and his death left me devastated. One of Walter's greatest passions was coin collecting. He'd accumulated an extraordinary collection of rare American coins, including several 1804 silver dollars, Carson City mint coins, and other numismatic treasures worth approximately $430,000, according to his last appraisal. Walter had been specific in his will about the coin collection. It was to remain intact until my death, then be divided equally among our 3 children. He'd wanted them to inherit it together, hoping they'd either maintain it as a family legacy or sell it and split proceeds fairly. The collection represented not just financial value, but decades of Walter's research, hunting, and passion. After Walter's death, I kept the collection in our safety deposit box at the bank where it had always been stored. I was the primary key holder, with Lydia listed as secondary access in case of emergency, a practical arrangement since she lived closest and could help if I ever needed something from the box. About 6 months after Walter's death, Lydia started offering to help with my banking errands. She'd drive me to the bank for routine deposits and withdrawals, saying she enjoyed spending time together and wanted to help with tasks that had become difficult for me. I appreciated her attentiveness during my grieving period. On 3 separate occasions over 4 months, Lydia suggested we check on the coin collection to make sure everything is secure. We'd go to the bank together, access the safety deposit box, and I'd briefly look through the coins while Lydia watched. She'd make comments about how valuable they were and how important it was that they be properly protected. I thought nothing of these visits. They seemed like reasonable security checks. What I didn't realize was that Lydia was replacing real coins with convincing counterfeits during these visits. While I was distracted looking at one section of the collection, she'd swap authentic rare coins for fake reproductions she'd purchased online. 2 weeks ago, my grandson Andrew, 19 Yem, mentioned he'd become interested in coin collecting and asked if he could see his grandfather's collection. I was delighted and arranged a bank visit to show him the treasures Walter had accumulated. When we opened the safety deposit box, Andrew immediately noticed something wrong. He'd been studying numismatics and recognized that several of the coins looked incorrect. Wrong weight, suspicious coloring, details that didn't match authentic specimens. He suggested we have the collection appraised to verify authenticity. The appraiser's report was devastating. Approximately 85% of Walter's collection consisted of counterfeits worth collectively about $2,000. The authentic rare coins, the 1804 silver dollars worth $180,000 alone, the Carson City coins worth another $120,000, and dozens of other valuable pieces had been replaced with cheap reproductions. Someone with access to our safety deposit box had systematically stolen Walter's life's work and replaced it with fakes. Only 2 people had access, me and Lydia, who had secondary keyholder status. I confronted Lydia immediately. She initially claimed the bank must have been robbed or that there was appraisal error. But when I threatened to report the theft to police and have the bank's security footage reviewed, she admitted what she'd done. Lydia had copied the safety deposit box keys during one of her helpful bank visits with me. She'd ordered counterfeit coins online that resembled Walter's most valuable pieces. During our security check visits, she distracted me while swapping real coins for fakes, pocketing the authentic pieces in her purse. Over 3 visits, Lydia had stolen approximately $410,000 worth of rare coins, leaving only the least valuable pieces. She'd already sold most of them to various coin dealers and online buyers, converting Walter's life's passion into cash she'd spent on home renovations, a new car, and paying off debt. I reported Lydia to police for grand theft and fraud. The investigation confirmed her systematic theft. Bank security footage showed her making suspicious movements near the coin boxes during our visits. Coin dealers identified her as selling rare coins matching Walter's collection, and financial records showed she'd received approximately $320,000 from various sales, less than true value due to rushed sales and dealer markups. Lydia was charged with multiple felonies and pled guilty. She received a 5-year prison sentence plus restitution orders for $430,000, the collection's full appraised value. However, she'd already spent most of the proceeds, meaning actual restitution would be minimal and prolonged. The theft devastated me beyond the financial loss. Walter had spent 38 years building that collection, attending coin shows, researching history, carefully acquiring each piece. The collection represented his passion, his knowledge, and his legacy to our children and grandchildren. Lydia had destroyed all of that in 3 calculated thefts to pay for home improvements. My relationship with Lydia's siblings, my other 2 children, was also damaged. They were furious at Lydia for stealing their inheritance and betraying their father's memory. They supported my prosecution decision, but were devastated by the family fracture. Walter's death had brought grief. Lydia's theft brought family destruction. Lydia's own children, my grandchildren ages 16 and 14, were traumatized by their mother's incarceration and the shame of her theft from their grandmother. They've apologized repeatedly for something that wasn't their fault, carrying guilt that belongs to Lydia. Some extended family members accused me of being too harsh prosecuting my own daughter, saying family betrayals should be handled privately. But Lydia had stolen $410,000 of irreplaceable items that were her father's legacy. She'd deliberately planned the theft, executed it over months, and had shown no remorse until facing legal consequences. The most painful aspect is that much of Walter's collection is permanently lost. Coins sold to various dealers have been resold to collectors worldwide. Some pieces are likely gone forever, melted down or dispersed beyond recovery. Walter's 38 years of careful collecting were destroyed in months by our daughter's greed. I still have the worthless counterfeits Lydia left behind, cruel mockeries of Walter's treasures. I can't bring myself to throw them away, but keeping them feels like preserving evidence of betrayal. They sit in the safety deposit box, reminders that someone I raised and loved valued money more than her father's memory. Lydia will serve 5 years in prison and will make minimal restitution payments for decades afterward. She'll never fully repay what she stole financially, and she can never restore Walter's collection. The coins are scattered, sold, gone forever. Walter's legacy was destroyed by our daughter's calculated theft. I question whether I should have prosecuted Lydia given the impact on her children, my innocent grandchildren who now have an incarcerated mother and carry shame for crimes they didn't commit. But Lydia made choices, knowing they'd affect her family. She prioritized home renovations over her father's legacy and her mother's security. Those consequences belong to her. Walter would have been heartbroken seeing what happened to his collection and seeing our daughter's betrayal. He'd spent years teaching our children about numismatics, sharing his passion, hoping they'd appreciate the history and artistry. Lydia learned only to see dollar signs and opportunity for theft. I'm 75 now, living with the permanent loss of Walter's collection and the betrayal of our daughter. The financial value matters less than the sentimental loss. Walter's passion project, his legacy, destroyed. Some of those coins he'd searched for years to find. Each piece had stories. All gone because Lydia wanted a kitchen renovation more than she valued her father's memory. The safety deposit box remains nearly empty now. Just the worthless counterfeits and a few authentic, low-value pieces Lydia didn't bother stealing. Every time I visit the bank, I'm reminded of what was stolen and what can never be recovered. Walter's 38 years of passion reduced to fake coins and bitter memories. My family hid my husband's death for 6 months to keep collecting his pension checks. Those 2 routine words masked the cruelest deception. My daughter, Maureen, 61 Ferromil, and son, Frank, 58 Mil, weren't helping me manage finances after my stroke as they claimed, but were hiding the fact that my husband, Harold, had died 6 months earlier, so they could continue collecting his $4,200 monthly pension, and I, 83 Ferromil, only discovered the truth when I recovered enough speech to ask why Harold never visited me in the rehabilitation facility. I suffered a severe stroke 14 months ago that left me partially paralyzed and with significant speech aphasia. I spent months in intensive rehabilitation, unable to communicate clearly or understand fully what was happening around me. Maureen and Frank took control of my care, visiting regularly and managing all my affairs while I focused on recovery. During those early months, my memories are fragmented. I recall asking about Harold repeatedly. Where was he? Why wasn't he visiting? Was he okay? Maureen and Frank would give vague answers I couldn't fully process in my confused state. Dad's not feeling well. He'll visit when you're stronger. He's resting at home. I accepted these explanations, my stroke-affected brain unable to question or push for clarity. As my cognitive function improved after about 8 months, I became more insistent about seeing Harold. We'd been married 61 years. I needed my husband. Maureen and Frank continued making excuses, saying Harold was dealing with his own health issues, and the doctors didn't want him traveling to the facility. Finally, after 10 months in rehabilitation, I'd recovered enough speech to demand clearly. I want to see Harold now. Bring him tomorrow or take me home. Maureen and Frank exchanged glances I couldn't interpret. Then Maureen said gently, "Mom, we need to talk about Dad." That's when they told me Harold had died. Not recently, but 6 months ago, just 2 months after my stroke. He'd had a heart attack at home. They'd held a funeral I never attended. He was buried in our family plot. They'd been lying to me for half a year about my husband being alive. I was devastated beyond comprehension. My husband of 61 years had died, and my children had hidden it from me for 6 months. They'd let me believe Harold was alive, waiting for me, planning to visit. They'd robbed me of the chance to say goodbye, to attend his funeral, to grieve with family and friends. Maureen tried to justify their decision, claiming they'd been protecting me. The doctors had said major emotional stress could trigger another stroke in my fragile condition, so they'd decided to hide Harold's death until I was stronger. They claimed they'd plan to tell me eventually, once I'd recovered more fully. But something felt deeply wrong about their explanation. Why wait 6 months? I'd asked about Harold constantly. Didn't that show I was emotionally capable of knowing the truth? And their behavior when I'd ask about him, it seemed evasive and guilty, not protective. After returning home from rehabilitation, I began reviewing our financial records. I discovered that Harold's pension checks, $4,200 monthly from his 40 years at the railroad, had continued being deposited into our joint account every month since his death. 6 months of payments totaling $25,200 had been collected, despite Harold being deceased. I also found that Maureen and Frank had been withdrawing money from the account regularly, $3,000 to $4,000 monthly, for expenses related to my care and Harold's supposed medical bills. But I was in a rehabilitation facility covered by Medicare and supplemental insurance. Harold was dead and had no medical bills. Where had that money actually gone? I confronted Maureen and Frank with the bank statements. The truth emerged. They'd deliberately hidden Harold's death so they could continue collecting his pension illegally. They'd known that once the railroad was notified of his death, the pension payments would stop immediately. By hiding his death for 6 months, they'd collected $25,200 in fraudulent pension payments. The money they'd withdrawn hadn't gone to my care. It had funded their own expenses. Maureen had used it for a kitchen renovation. Frank had paid off credit card debt and taken his family on vacation. They'd been stealing pension money intended for a deceased man, while lying to his widow about his death. The betrayal was multi-layered and devastating. Not only had Maureen and Frank hidden my husband's death and stolen our pension money, but they'd also robbed me of closure and the grieving process. I'd lost 6 months where I could have been processing Harold's death, visiting his grave, and finding some peace. Instead, I'd spent that time believing he was alive and waiting for me. I reported Maureen and Frank to both law enforcement and the Railroad Pension Authority. The investigation confirmed they'd committed pension fraud by failing to report Harold's death and continuing to collect payments they knew were improper. They'd forged my signature on bank withdrawal slips and had systematically stolen from the pension fund. Both were charged with pension fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. Maureen pled guilty and received 3 years in prison, plus restitution orders. Frank went to trial but was convicted and received 4 years. They were ordered to repay the $25,200 fraudulently collected, plus penalties and my attorney fees. The Railroad Pension Authority was sympathetic to my situation, but required repayment of the improper distributions. The $25,200 had to be returned, though Maureen and Frank's restitution would eventually cover it. In the meantime, I faced financial strain from the repayment obligation and from legal fees that exceeded what I could recover from my children. My relationship with both children is permanently destroyed. They didn't just steal money. They denied me the chance to say goodbye to my husband of 61 years, to grieve with our community, to have closure. They weaponized my stroke vulnerability to commit fraud while robbing me of precious time I could have spent processing Harold's death. Harold's brother and sister, my in-laws for over 60 years, have been supportive, but are also grieving the loss of attending Harold's funeral and supporting me through widowhood. Maureen and Frank's deception affected not just me, but our entire extended family, who would have wanted to say goodbye and provide support. I'm now 84, living alone in the house Harold and I shared for 50 years. I visit his grave weekly, talking to him about everything we missed in those 6 months my children stole from us. I tell him about my rehabilitation progress he never witnessed. I apologize for not being there when he died. I grieve the final conversations we could have had if my children had told me the truth. The financial fraud was serious and warranted prosecution. But the emotional abuse, denying a widow knowledge of her husband's death to steal pension money, is the unforgivable part. Maureen and Frank prioritized a kitchen renovation and a vacation over my right to grieve my life partner. They saw my stroke vulnerability as an opportunity for theft rather than a reason for compassion. Some family members have suggested I was too harsh in prosecuting my own children, that family conflicts should be handled privately. But this wasn't a conflict. It was systematic elder abuse combined with fraud. Maureen and Frank made calculated decisions repeatedly over 6 months to hide Harold's death and steal money. Those weren't mistakes. They were crimes. I'll die without reconciling with my children. That grief compounds the loss of Harold. But I won't forgive people who exploited my stroke to commit fraud while denying me the chance to say goodbye to my husband. Some betrayals sever relationships permanently, even between parents and children. This is one of them. My family kept me drugged for months to forge my signature on property deeds. Sleeping pills. Those two innocent words became my family's weapon to render me helpless. My daughter, Brenda, 56 euros female, and her husband, Carl, 58-year-old male, weren't helping me sleep better as they claimed, but were secretly drugging me with prescription sedatives to keep me unconscious for hours while they forged my signature on documents transferring my $890,000 estate to themselves. And I, 81-year-old male, only discovered their scheme when my neighbor found me collapsed in my yard, and paramedics discovered dangerously high levels of sedatives in my system. After my wife died 3 years ago, I struggled with grief and occasional insomnia. Brenda noticed my sleep difficulties during her weekly visits and suggested I talk to my doctor about sleep aids. She even offered to schedule the appointment and accompany me, which I appreciated, given my hearing problems and tendency to forget medical instructions. Brenda took me to what I thought was my regular physician's office, though the location seemed unfamiliar. The doctor prescribed strong sleeping pills, 2 tablets nightly to help me sleep through the night. Brenda picked up the prescription and brought it to my house with detailed instructions about timing and dosage. I started taking the pills as directed. They worked remarkably well, perhaps too well. I'd take 2 tablets around 8 p.m. as instructed, and would wake up 12 or 14 hours later feeling groggy and disoriented. Entire nights would disappear from my memory. I'd find myself in bed wearing different clothes than I remembered, or discover my house had been rearranged, or notice documents on my kitchen table I didn't recall seeing. Brenda visited 3 or 4 times weekly during this period, always in the evenings. She'd stay for dinner, help me take my medication, and would still be there when I became drowsy. I'd wake the next morning and she'd be gone, with a note saying she'd let herself out after I fell asleep. This routine continued for approximately 7 months. I became increasingly concerned about my memory gaps and the medication's powerful effects. But Brenda assured me this was normal for strong sleep aids and that my doctor had said the dosage was appropriate for someone my age. Then, one afternoon, I attempted to mow my lawn despite feeling unusually weak and dizzy. I collapsed in my front yard. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, saw me fall and called 911. Paramedics transported me to the hospital, where doctors ran comprehensive tests to determine why I'd collapsed. The toxicology results were alarming. I had extremely elevated levels of zolpidem and lorazepam in my system, far beyond therapeutic doses. The medications would explain my prolonged unconsciousness, memory gaps, and physical weakness. The doctor said I'd been taking dangerously high doses that could have killed me. I was confused because I'd only taken the 2 pills Brenda gave me each night as prescribed. The doctors asked to see my medication bottles. When hospital staff examined them, they discovered the sleeping pills were actually containers Brenda had filled with multiple different sedatives in much higher doses than any doctor would prescribe. The physician I'd supposedly visited didn't exist. Brenda had taken me to a rented office and had someone pose as a doctor. The prescription was forged. Brenda had been deliberately over-sedating me for months, keeping me unconscious for 12+ hours nightly. While reviewing my confusion and memory gaps, a hospital social worker became concerned about potential elder abuse. She suggested I check my financial accounts and legal documents to ensure nothing had been altered during my months of impaired consciousness. I contacted my attorney, who discovered devastating fraud. During the 7 months I'd been heavily sedated, multiple property deeds had been filed transferring ownership of my house, valued at $520,000, my rental property, $310,000, and my investment accounts, $60,000, from my name to Brenda and Carl's names. The signatures appeared to be mine, but I had no memory of signing anything. My attorney obtained the original documents from county records. Forensic analysis confirmed the signatures were forgeries. Someone had traced my signature repeatedly to create convincing fakes. The notarizations were also fraudulent, with a notary stamp that belonged to Carl's sister, who was a notary public and had apparently participated in the scheme. The timeline was clear. Brenda had been drugging me into deep unconsciousness. Then she and Carl would forge my signature on property transfer documents while I was incapacitated. They'd done this systematically over 7 months, transferring nearly my entire estate to themselves while I was too sedated to understand or consent. I reported Brenda, Carl, and Carl's sister to police for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and administering drugs without consent. All 3 were arrested. The investigation revealed Brenda and Carl had significant gambling debts and had planned to sell my properties immediately after the transfers were complete. The forged property transfers were voided, and ownership reverted to me. Brenda, Carl, and his sister all pled guilty of various charges. Brenda received 6 years in prison, Carl received 5 years, and his sister received 3 years plus permanent loss of her notary license. But the damage extended beyond financial theft. I'd spent 7 months in a drugged fog, lost significant time with my grandchildren, and suffered health consequences from prolonged sedative exposure that my doctors say may have caused permanent cognitive effects. My relationship with my grandchildren, Brenda's 3 adult children, was destroyed. They struggle to reconcile loving memories of their mother with the reality that she systematically drugged and robbed their grandfather. 2 of the 3 have maintained contact with me, but our relationship is strained by grief over their mother's incarceration and betrayal. I question whether I should have pursued criminal charges, knowing it would result in my daughter's imprisonment and my grandchildren's trauma. But Brenda had been willing to risk killing me with dangerous sedative doses to steal my property. That level of callous exploitation couldn't be forgiven or handled privately. The neighbor who found me collapsed, likely saved my life. Doctors said continued exposure to those sedative levels could have caused fatal respiratory depression or cardiac events. Brenda was slowly poisoning me to facilitate property theft, and she showed no indication of stopping until everything was transferred. I now live with constant medication anxiety, carefully tracking everything I consume and refusing any pills I haven't personally obtained from verified physicians. The trust violation was so profound that I struggled to accept help even from professional caregivers, terrified of being rendered helpless again. My daughter spent 7 months drugging me unconscious to steal my life's accumulated assets. That's not a forgivable mistake or a desperate moment of poor judgment. It's systematic, calculated elder abuse that could have killed me. She deserves the consequences, even if those consequences devastated my grandchildren and destroyed our family. Some betrayals are too profound for reconciliation, even between parent and child. My family sold my classic car collection while I was in a coma after surgery. Surgery complications. Those 2 medical words became my family's opportunity for theft. My son, Mitchell, 52-year-old male, and daughter, Pamela, 49-year-old female, weren't protecting my assets during my recovery as they claimed, but were systematically selling my 17-vehicle classic car collection worth approximately $1.8 million while I lay unconscious after routine surgery led to unexpected complications. And I, 78-year-old male, only discovered the betrayal when I woke after 5 weeks and asked my physical therapist why the garage visible from my hospital window was empty. I'd spent 45 years building my classic car collection: a 1967 Shelby GT500, a 1963 Corvette split window, a 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda, and 14 other meticulously restored vehicles. Each car represented years of searching, restoration work, and investment. The collection was my passion, my retirement hobby, and a significant portion of my estate I'd planned to leave to my grandchildren, who shared my automotive enthusiasm. I went in for what should have been routine gallbladder surgery 2 months ago. The procedure was supposed to be straightforward laparoscopic surgery with a few days recovery. But complications during surgery, bleeding they couldn't control, led to emergency interventions, massive blood loss, and ultimately induced coma while my body stabilized. I was unconscious for 5 weeks. During that time, Mitchell and Pamela had medical power of attorney and managed my affairs. They told the hospital staff they were handling everything: my bills, my property, my business matters. The medical team focused on keeping me alive while my children supposedly protected my interests. When I finally regained consciousness, I spent another week in intensive care before being moved to a rehabilitation unit with a window overlooking the parking area. From my bed, I could see my detached garage where I'd stored my collection. The garage door was open, and the building was completely empty. I asked my physical therapist about it, thinking perhaps the cars had been moved for security during my hospitalization. She looked uncomfortable and said she'd noticed moving trucks at the property several weeks ago, but didn't know details. I immediately demanded my phone and called Mitchell. Mitchell's response was casual and shocking. "Oh yeah, we sold the cars. We needed to cover your medical bills and didn't know if you'd survive, so we liquidated assets." He said it as if selling my life's passion project was a routine administrative decision, like paying utility bills. I was stunned. My insurance covered the surgery and complications. I had substantial savings and investments. There was no financial emergency requiring liquidation of my car collection. And even if there had been, Mitchell and Pamela had no authority to sell my property. Medical power of attorney covers healthcare decisions, not asset sales. When I pressed Mitchell for details, the truth emerged. He and Pamela had used forged financial power of attorney documents to gain access to my property. While I was in a coma, they'd hired an estate liquidation company and sold all 17 vehicles through auctions and private sales over a 4-week period. The collection that appraisers had valued at $1.8 million had been sold in forced liquidation for approximately $980,000. Mitchell and Pamela had pocketed the entire amount, claiming they'd assumed I would die and were protecting the estate by converting assets to cash before probate complications arose. The specific cars and their sale prices made me physically ill. My 1967 Shelby GT500, worth $350,000 properly sold, had gone at auction for $175,000 because Mitchell rushed the sale. My 1963 split-window Corvette, worth $200,000, sold for $95,000. Every vehicle sold for 40 to 60% below proper market value because my children had prioritized speed over maximizing value. When I demanded the $980,000 they'd collected, Mitchell and Pamela claimed they'd invested it in estate management expenses and legal fees. The truth was they'd divided the money between themselves, splitting $980,000 while I was unconscious and unable to object. I discovered they'd also sold my car parts inventory, my restoration tools worth tens of thousands, and various automotive memorabilia I'd collected. They'd essentially liquidated my entire automotive passion while telling hospital staff they were managing my affairs responsibly. I reported Mitchell and Pamela to police for fraud, theft, and forgery. The investigation confirmed they'd created fraudulent power of attorney documents. My signature was forged. The notarization was fake. Pamela's friend had posed as a notary, and the documents had never been properly filed with any court or attorney. The estate liquidation company cooperated with investigators, providing detailed records of all sales. Mitchell and Pamela had represented themselves as acting under proper legal authority, and the company had no reason to question the documents they'd presented. The company wasn't complicit, but had unwittingly facilitated the theft. Both Mitchell and Pamela were charged with multiple felonies: grand theft, forgery, elder abuse, and fraud. Faced with overwhelming evidence, both pled guilty. Mitchell received 5 years in prison. Pamela received 4 years. They were ordered to pay full restitution of $1.8 million, the collection's proper value, not the $980,000 they'd received in forced liquidation. However, they'd already spent most of the money. Mitchell had paid off his mortgage, $340,000, purchased a boat, $85,000, and taken his family on luxury vacations, $60,000. Pamela had renovated her home, $280,000, and purchased investment properties, $190,000. While the restitution order existed legally, recovering the full amount would take decades, if ever. The loss extended beyond financial value. Those cars represented 45 years of passion, effort, and memories. I'd restored many personally, spending countless hours in my garage bringing deteriorated vehicles back to perfect condition. Each car had stories, where I'd found it, challenges during restoration, shows where I'd displayed them. My grandson, Eric, 19-year male, who'd spent his childhood in my garage learning about cars and planning to inherit the collection someday, was devastated. He'd bonded with me over automotive passion, had helped with restorations, and had looked forward to maintaining the collection after I passed. Mitchell and Pamela had stolen not just from me, but from Eric's future and our shared legacy. My relationship with both children is permanently destroyed. Mitchell's wife divorced him during his incarceration, embarrassed by his theft from his father. Pamela's husband stood by her, but their marriage is strained. My 4 grandchildren are in therapy, processing their parents' crimes and incarceration. Some extended family suggested I was too harsh prosecuting my own children, that I should have handled it privately and allowed them to repay over time. But they'd committed calculated theft while I was unconscious and fighting for life after surgery complications. They'd shown no remorse, only entitlement to my assets and assumption I'd die anyway. I'm now 79, my collection gone forever. The garage where I'd spent countless happy hours sits empty. I occasionally see my cars at shows or online. Other people now own vehicles I'd restored and cherished. Each sighting is painful, a reminder of what my children stole. The $1.8 million restitution order will likely never be fully paid. Mitchell and Pamela will spend years in prison, then decades making minimal payments they can barely afford. I'll die before seeing full repayment. But prosecution wasn't about money recovery. It was about accountability for exploiting my surgical complications to commit theft. I struggle with guilt about my grandchildren suffering consequences of their parents' crimes. But Mitchell and Pamela made choices knowing the impact on their families. They chose to steal from me, rather than wait for legitimate inheritance. They prioritized boats and renovations over their integrity and their children's well-being. Those consequences belong to them, not to me for seeking justice. My family staged an intervention to force me into selling my farm to developers. Family intervention. Those 2 concerned words masked my children's greed. My son, Russell, 49 Yale male, and daughters, Diane, 47 Yale female, and Carol, 44 Yale female, weren't worried about my ability to maintain the family farm as they claimed, but were conspiring to pressure me into selling 320 acres worth $4.8 million to developers so they could split the proceeds. And I, 76 Yale male, only discovered their real motivation when I found emails between them discussing how to convince the old man to finally sell, and calculating their inheritance shares. I've owned and worked Meadowview Farm for 53 years. My wife Eleanor and I bought the land in 1972 when it was affordable farmland outside the city. We raised cattle, grew hay and corn, and built a good life. Eleanor passed 8 years ago, but I've continued working the farm with help from hired hands. The land has appreciated enormously as the city expanded. The 320 acres, once worth $80,000, are now valued at $4.8 million because developers want to build a massive residential subdivision. I've refused multiple offers. This farm is my life's work and Eleanor's memory. I plan to work it until I die, then leave it to my children to decide its future. 6 months ago, my 3 children requested a family meeting to discuss my future. They said they were worried about me living alone on the farm at 76, concerned about my ability to maintain the property, and wanted to discuss options for my well-being and safety. The meeting felt like an ambush. Russell, Diane, and Carol had prepared presentations about assisted living facilities, statistics about farming accidents involving elderly people, and financial analyses of farm maintenance costs versus selling. They said they were concerned I was isolated, that the physical demands were dangerous at my age, and that I should consider selling the farm and moving somewhere safer. I was hurt and defensive. I'm in excellent health, still capable of farm work, and not ready to abandon my life's work. I told them I appreciated their concern, but had no intention of selling or moving to assisted living. My children became more persistent over the following months. They'd visit and point out maintenance issues. "Dad, this fence needs repair. That's dangerous at your age. The barn roof is sagging. You can't climb up there to fix it. Managing cattle is too much physical work for someone your age." Each observation came with the same conclusion. Maybe it was time to consider selling. They'd mentioned the developer offers, the financial security selling would provide, how I could live comfortably in a nice apartment without farm responsibilities. I repeatedly refused. The farm wasn't just property. It was 50 years of memories with Eleanor, the place we'd raised our children, my entire adult life. I wasn't abandoning it because my children thought I was too old. Then, 3 weeks ago, I found Russell's laptop open in my kitchen after one of his visits. He'd been reviewing emails and hadn't logged out. I noticed the screen showed an email chain between my 3 children with subject line, "Dad and the farm sale." Curious and concerned, I read the emails. What I discovered was devastating. My children had been conspiring for over a year to pressure me into selling the farm. The emails discussed strategies to convince me I couldn't maintain it, ways to emphasize safety concerns, and how to frame selling as for my own good. One email from Diane was particularly cruel. "We need to be more aggressive about the intervention. Dad's stubborn, but if we all stay consistent about safety concerns and his declining abilities, he'll eventually cave. The developer's latest offer is $4.8 million. That's $1.6 million each after taxes. I need this money." Another from Carol. "Maybe we should contact Adult Protective Services and claim he's not maintaining the property safely. That might force a competency evaluation and give us legal standing to make decisions for him." Russell's responses coordinated their approach. "Let's do another family meeting next month. Bring more statistics about elderly farming accidents. If we present it right, we can make him feel like selling is his idea." The entire concern for my well-being had been fabricated. My children weren't worried about my safety. They wanted their inheritance early and were willing to manipulate me into selling my life's work so they could split $4.8 million immediately rather than waiting for me to die. I was devastated and furious. I printed all the emails documenting their conspiracy, then called a family meeting of my own. When Russell, Diane, and Carol arrived expecting another opportunity to pressure me about selling, I confronted them with their own emails. The room went silent. None of them could deny it. Their own words proved they'd been manipulating me for over a year, fabricating safety concerns, and conspiring to force a sale so they could access inheritance money while I was still alive. Russell tried to justify it, saying they were genuinely concerned about the farm being too much work. But the emails made clear their real motivation was money. Diane became angry, saying I was being selfish by refusing to sell when they needed the money. Carol cried and tried to apologize, but couldn't explain the email, suggesting they call Adult Protective Services to force a competency evaluation. I told all 3 they were no longer welcome on my property. I contacted my attorney and immediately revised my will. The farm would be donated to a land conservancy upon my death, preserved as agricultural land in perpetuity. My children would inherit nothing from the property they'd tried to pressure me into selling. I also filed reports with Adult Protective Services myself, documenting Carol's suggestion that they make false reports about my competency. APS investigated and cleared me as fully capable and competent, while noting that making false APS reports to gain control of someone's assets constitutes elder abuse. My relationship with all 3 children is destroyed. They haven't accepted being disinherited gracefully. Russell has threatened legal action, claiming I'm being manipulated by the conservancy. Diane hasn't spoken to me since being cut from the will. Only Carol has attempted genuine apology, though the damage is irreparable. My 7 grandchildren have been caught in the middle. Some have sided with their parents, believing I'm being unreasonable. Others have reached out privately, apologizing for their parents' behavior. These relationships are strained by their parents' betrayal. Some extended family and friends have suggested I was too harsh disinheriting my children completely, that I should leave them something, even if not the farm. But they conspired for over a year to manipulate me into giving up my life's work for their financial gain. They discussed calling APS to force competency evaluations. They fabricated concerns about my health and safety purely to pressure me into selling. The Land Conservancy will preserve Meadowview Farm as agricultural land forever, exactly what Eleanor and I would have wanted. The farm won't be bulldozed for subdivisions. Future generations will use it for farming, not luxury homes. This outcome honors 50 years of work Eleanor and I invested here. I'm 76 years old, still working the farm daily with hired help. I'm in good health and fully competent despite my children's suggestions otherwise. I plan to work this land until I die, then let the Conservancy preserve it. My children will inherit my personal assets and investments, but not the farm they tried to manipulate me into abandoning. The emails I discovered revealed my children's true characters. They valued $1.6 million each, more than my happiness, autonomy, and life's work. They were willing to lie, manipulate, and potentially abuse the legal system to force a sale. That betrayal severed our relationship permanently. Russell is 49, Diane is 47, Carol is 44. All adults who made deliberate choices to conspire against their father. Their behavior wasn't youthful mistake or momentary weakness. It was calculated, sustained manipulation over more than a year. Those actions have consequences, including disinheritance. I've found peace in knowing the farm will be preserved. Eleanor would be proud that Meadowview will remain agricultural land, rather than becoming another suburban development. That legacy matters more than ensuring my children receive millions from selling property they'd bulldoze the day after my funeral. Some betrayals permanently sever family bonds. Conspiring to manipulate your 76-year-old father into abandoning his life's work so you can split millions immediately, rather than waiting for natural inheritance. That's one of them. My children made their choice when they wrote those emails. Now they live with the consequences. A disinherited farm, and a destroyed relationship with their father. My granddaughter recorded me having a mental breakdown and sold it to tabloids. Privacy violation. Those 2 stark words describe my granddaughter. Alexis's, 27, female, ultimate betrayal. She wasn't comforting me through grief, as she claimed, but was secretly recording my most vulnerable moments after my son's sudden death, and sold the footage to tabloid media for $85,000. And I, 73, female, only discovered her exploitation when a former colleague called asking if I'd seen the viral celebrity grandmother breakdown video circulating online. I'm a retired television actress from several popular sitcoms in the 1980s and 90s. While I was never a major star, I'm recognizable to certain generations and maintain some public profile. I've always protected my privacy fiercely, especially after retiring from acting 20 years ago. 3 months ago, my youngest son, Daniel, 41, M, died suddenly in a car accident. I was devastated. No parent should bury their child. Daniel was vibrant, healthy, and had his whole life ahead of him. His death shattered me completely. Alexis, Daniel's daughter, seemed equally destroyed by her father's death. She stayed with me for 2 weeks after the funeral, ostensibly to provide support and companionship during my grief. We'd cry together, share memories of Daniel, and hold each other through the worst moments. During those 2 weeks, I had several severe emotional breakdowns, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming at the unfairness, experiencing panic attacks where I couldn't breathe. Alexis would hold me, reassure me, and tell me to let out all my pain. She'd say, "Don't hold back, Grandma. I'm here. You're safe to feel everything." I thought Alexis's encouragement to express my grief fully was therapeutic compassion. I trusted her completely and allowed myself to be utterly vulnerable in ways I'd never been with anyone else. I'd wail, I'd rage, I'd collapse in anguish, the rawest, most private moments of devastating grief. What I didn't know was that Alexis had hidden cameras throughout my home. She'd set up recording devices in my bedroom, living room, and kitchen, anywhere I might have emotional breakdowns. She'd been capturing everything. 2 weeks after Alexis left, my former co-star from one of my sitcoms called, concerned and confused. She'd seen video footage online of me having severe emotional breakdowns, sobbing and screaming about Daniel's death. The footage was being shared widely on social media and entertainment news sites under headlines like "Beloved 80s sitcom star's heartbreaking grief" and "Exclusive, former TV mom's private pain exposed." I was horrified and couldn't understand how such footage existed. Then I found a tabloid article that credited Family Source for the exclusive video. The article included multiple clips of me at my absolute worst, crying hysterically in my bedroom, having a panic attack in my kitchen, screaming, "Why did God take my baby?" while collapsed on my living room floor. I called Alexis immediately, assuming someone had hacked her phone or stolen recordings she might have made for innocent reasons. Her response was cold and shocking. "I sold the footage. I needed the money, and tabloids pay well for celebrity content. You're the one who said I should let you grieve openly." Alexis had deliberately recorded my most private, vulnerable moments of grief over my son's death. She'd hidden cameras specifically to capture my breakdowns. She'd encouraged me to express my pain fully, not out of compassion, but to get better footage. Then she'd sold everything to tabloid media for $85,000. The videos had gone viral, viewed millions of times by strangers who consumed my grief as entertainment. People were commenting on my appearance, psychoanalyzing my emotional state, creating memes from my suffering. My most profound pain, a mother's anguish over losing her child, had become content for public consumption. I contacted attorneys who confirmed Alexis had committed multiple crimes: illegal recording. My state requires two-party consent, invasion of privacy, and potentially exploitation of elder grief for financial gain. We sent cease and desist letters to media outlets, but the footage had already spread too widely to fully contain. I sued Alexis civilly for invasion of privacy, emotional distress, and misappropriation of my image. I also reported her to law enforcement for illegal recording. The case drew significant media attention. My first public appearance in years was giving testimony about how my granddaughter had exploited my grief over her father's death. During proceedings, Alexis showed no genuine remorse. She claimed she had bills to pay, and that I was a public figure, so my privacy expectations were limited. Her attorney argued that while the recording might have been illegal technically, the footage was newsworthy because of my former celebrity status. The judge disagreed strongly. She ruled that regardless of my past public life, Footage of me grieving my son's death in my private home was not newsworthy. It was exploitative voyeurism. Alexis had criminally violated my privacy during my most vulnerable period for financial profit. Alexis was convicted of illegal recording and ordered to pay $250,000 in damages, the $85,000 she'd received, plus additional punitive damages for the emotional harm. She was also sentenced to 18 months in prison, with the judge emphasizing that exploiting an elderly grandmother's grief over her son's death for tabloid profit was particularly egregious. But legal consequences couldn't undo the violation. Millions of people had watched me at my absolute lowest. Strangers had consumed my private agony as entertainment. My grief over Daniel, the most sacred, intimate pain imaginable, had been commodified and distributed globally. The relationship with Alexis is destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. She didn't just betray my trust. She exploited her father's death, weaponized my grief, and sold my most vulnerable moments to tabloids. That level of calculated cruelty toward her own grandmother, while supposedly mourning her father, reveals someone fundamentally lacking in empathy or moral boundaries. Daniel's other family members, his ex-wife and his son, Alexis's brother, were horrified and have cut contact with Alexis. They're devastated that she exploited Daniel's death for profit, while his mother was drowning in grief. The family fracture compounds the loss of Daniel. I've become reclusive since the footage leak, unable to go in public without wondering if people recognize me from the viral grief videos rather than my acting work. The small amount of public goodwill I'd maintained from my sitcom years has been replaced by either pity or morbid curiosity about my breakdown footage. Mental health professionals have explained that having private grief publicly exposed creates unique trauma. The violation compounds the original loss. I'm not just grieving Daniel. I'm grieving the theft of my right to grieve privately. Every time I cry for my son now, I'm haunted by memories of hidden cameras and tabloid headlines. I question whether prosecuting Alexis was worth destroying what remained of our family. But she committed serious crimes by recording me without consent and exploiting elder vulnerability for profit. The $85,000 she received came from commercializing her grandmother's anguish over her father's death. That deserves consequences regardless of family bonds. My son Daniel would have been appalled by what his daughter did. He was protective of my privacy and proud I'd maintained dignity in retirement. Knowing his death became the catalyst for his daughter to exploit me would have broken his heart. That compounds my grief. Daniel's death led directly to this betrayal. I'll never recover the privacy Alexis stole. Those videos exist permanently online, endlessly reshared and discussed. Strangers will forever have access to footage of me at my most vulnerable, grieving my child. That's not something I can forgive, prosecute, or reconcile. It's simply a permanent wound that will hurt until I die. My granddaughter's caregiver job was abandoning me, alone while collecting my money. Daily caregiver. Those two reassuring words concealed my granddaughter Brianna's, 24-year female, cruelest fraud. She wasn't providing the live-in care she was being paid $4,500 monthly to deliver, but was abandoning me alone in my home for days at a time while collecting full wages and telling family I was being properly cared for. And I, 82-year-old female, only discovered the neglect when a postal worker found me collapsed from dehydration after Brianna hadn't been home for 5 days. After my stroke 2 years ago, I needed assistance with daily living, meal preparation, medication management, bathing, and mobility support. My daughter, Patricia, 54-year-old female, couldn't provide full-time care due to her own job, so the family hired Brianna as my live-in caregiver for $4,500 per month, plus free room and board. Brianna had just graduated college with substantial student debt and needed income. The family thought it was perfect. I'd get care from someone I knew and trusted, and Brianna would have steady employment while living rent-free. Patricia would visit weekly to check on us and handle financial matters. For the first 2 months, Brianna seemed attentive and responsible. She'd help me bathe, prepare meals, manage my medications, and assist with physical therapy exercises. I felt safe having her in the house, knowing help was always available if I needed it. But gradually, Brianna's presence decreased. She'd leave for quick errands that lasted hours. She'd go out with friends in the evenings, returning late or sometimes not until the next morning. When Patricia visited for her weekly checks, Brianna would ensure she was present and attentive, maintaining the appearance of proper care. What I didn't initially realize was that Brianna was spending less and less time at my home. She'd leave for entire days and nights, sometimes multiple days consecutively, while I managed alone. She'd prepare several days of simple meals in advance, sandwiches, frozen dinners, and leave them in the refrigerator with notes about which to eat when. Brianna would text me daily asking, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" which she'd later show Patricia as evidence of her attentive care. But texting isn't caregiving. I was alone most of the time, struggling with tasks I couldn't safely manage independently. I was too embarrassed to tell Patricia that Brianna was rarely home. I blamed myself, thinking perhaps I was too demanding, or that young people naturally needed social lives. I convinced myself the situation was adequate, even as I struggled alone with bathing, nearly fell multiple times, and sometimes missed medications because Brianna wasn't there to assist. Then, 3 weeks ago, Brianna left on a Wednesday morning, saying she had errands. Wednesday passed, then Thursday, then Friday. By Saturday, I'd eaten all the prepared food Brianna had left. I tried calling her repeatedly but got no answer. I couldn't reach high enough to access proper food in my cabinets, and my mobility issues made cooking dangerous. By Sunday morning, I was severely dehydrated and weak. I tried to get to the kitchen for water, but collapsed in the hallway. I lay there for hours, unable to get up, calling for help that wouldn't come. Fortunately, the postal worker who regularly delivered my mail noticed it piling up unusually. She knocked loudly, heard me calling weakly for help, and called 911. Paramedics broke in and found me collapsed, dehydrated, and incoherent after roughly 5 days alone without proper food or water. I was hospitalized for severe dehydration and malnutrition. The medical team asked where my live-in caregiver was during this 5-day abandonment. Patricia was contacted and was shocked. She'd been paying Brianna $4,500 monthly, believing she was providing full-time, live-in care. Hospital social workers investigated and discovered Brianna's pattern of neglect. Neighbors confirmed seeing Brianna leave my house for days at a time. Credit card records showed Brianna had been staying with her boyfriend 40 miles away, while supposedly living in my home, providing care. She'd been collecting full wages for months while providing minimal actual caregiving. When confronted, Brianna claimed I'd told her I didn't need constant supervision, and that leaving prepared meals was sufficient. But my medical condition required actual assistance with bathing, mobility, and medication management, not just prepared sandwiches and occasional texts. Patricia calculated that Brianna had collected approximately $36,000 over 8 months for live-in caregiving, while actually providing only sporadic, minimal assistance, and frequently abandoning me alone for multiple days. Patricia reported Brianna to law enforcement for elder neglect and fraud. The investigation confirmed systematic abandonment. Brianna had been collecting wages for full-time live-in caregiving, while regularly leaving me alone for 3 to 5 days at a time. Her abandonment had directly caused my hospitalization for dehydration and malnutrition. Brianna was charged with elder neglect and fraud. She pled guilty and received 18 months in prison plus restitution orders for $36,000, the full amount she'd been paid for care she didn't provide. She was also permanently banned from caregiving work. However, Brianna had already spent most of the money on student loan payments, rent for her boyfriend's apartment where she'd actually been living, and personal expenses. Actual restitution would be minimal and prolonged over years. The neglect had lasting health consequences. The 5 days of dehydration and malnutrition caused kidney damage that requires ongoing monitoring. I lost significant muscle strength from malnutrition that has been difficult to rebuild at 82. My confidence in my safety at home was destroyed. My relationship with Patricia has been strained by the situation. She feels tremendous guilt for not recognizing Brianna's neglect sooner, for trusting weekly check-ins were sufficient oversight, and for putting me at risk by hiring family rather than professional caregivers. Brianna's parents, my grandson Michael, 52-year male, and his wife, are devastated and humiliated. Michael has apologized repeatedly and offered to help pay for proper caregiving now, but his daughter's betrayal damaged family trust profoundly. Some family members have suggested I was too harsh prosecuting Brianna, that she was young and made mistakes, that family should forgive family. But Brianna's neglect nearly killed me. 5 days alone without proper food or water at 82 years old could easily have been fatal if the postal worker hadn't noticed and acted. I now have professional caregivers through a licensed agency, with multiple oversight systems to ensure proper care. The cost is higher, $6,800 monthly, but Patricia and I both agree that professional accountability is worth the expense after Brianna's betrayal. The 18 months Brianna will spend in prison feel simultaneously too much and too little. Yes, she's young and will have a criminal record affecting her future. But she collected $36,000 for care she didn't provide while leaving her elderly, stroke-impaired grandmother alone repeatedly, including a 5-day abandonment that resulted in hospitalization. What hurts most is that Brianna looked me in the eyes daily, asked, "Do you need anything?" via text from her boyfriend's apartment 40 miles away, and thought that constituted caregiving worth $4,500 monthly. She knew I struggled with mobility and medications. She knew leaving me alone for days was dangerous. She chose her convenience over my safety repeatedly. I'm 83 now, living with professional caregivers who are monitored closely. I'm recovering from the kidney damage and malnutrition, though full recovery at my age is unlikely. The postal worker who found me potentially saved my life. Without her attention, I might have died alone in that hallway while Brianna collected her monthly caregiving wages. The $36,000 restitution Brianna owes will likely never be fully paid. But prosecution was necessary. She committed serious elder neglect for financial gain. The fact that she's my granddaughter doesn't excuse leaving me alone for 5 days until I collapsed from dehydration. Some betrayals sever family bonds permanently, even between grandmother and granddaughter. This is one of them. My grandson convinced me to sign my house over to protect it from taxes. Estate planning. Those two practical words became the cover for theft. My grandson, Brandon, 32-year-old male, wasn't helping me avoid probate taxes as he claimed, but was stealing my $675,000 home by convincing me to sign transfer documents he said were protective trusts, when they were actually deeds giving him full ownership. And I, 77-year-old female, only discovered the fraud when I received an eviction notice from Brandon's attorney 3 weeks after the transfer. Brandon had always been my favorite grandchild. After his parents divorced when he was young, I'd helped raise him, paid for his college education, and maintained a close relationship throughout his adulthood. When he graduated law school and passed the bar exam, I was the proudest grandmother alive. About 8 months ago, Brandon visited with serious concerns about my estate planning. He explained that without proper legal structures, my house would go through probate after my death, and my heirs could lose 40 to 50% of its value to taxes and court fees. He said as an estate attorney, he saw families destroyed by poor planning and wanted to protect me. Brandon recommended creating a living trust, where I'd transfer the house into a trust that would avoid probate while allowing me to live there for life. After my death, the house would pass to my heirs without taxes or legal complications. He offered to handle all the paperwork free of charge as his gift to me. I was grateful for Brandon's professional expertise and his willingness to help without charging his usual legal fees. He brought documents to my house, explaining they established the protective trust. The paperwork was dense legal language I couldn't fully understand, but Brandon patiently explained each section, assuring me this was standard estate planning that would protect my assets. I signed the documents Brandon presented, trusting my beloved grandson, who was a licensed attorney. He had the signatures notarized by someone he brought with him, made copies for my records, and promised everything was properly filed with the county to protect my home. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter from an attorney's office I didn't recognize. The letter informed me I was occupying property owned by Brandon Mitchell and had 30 days to vacate or face formal eviction proceedings. I was confused and called Brandon immediately, certain this was a mistake. Brandon's response was cold and shocking. He explained that the documents I'd signed weren't trust paperwork. They were property deeds, transferring full ownership of my house from me to him. I no longer owned my home. He did. And he'd decided to sell the property, so I needed to leave within 30 days. I was devastated and confused. I'd trusted Brandon completely. He was my grandson and a licensed attorney. He'd told me I was signing trust documents that would protect my home while allowing me to live there for life. How could those documents have actually transferred ownership to him? I took my copies of the signed documents to another attorney for review. She confirmed my worst fears. The paperwork was a standard warranty deed transferring complete ownership of my property to Brandon. There was no trust, no life estate provision allowing me to remain in the home, nothing protecting my interests. I'd signed away my house believing I was protecting it. The notarization was also suspicious. The notary Brandon had brought was actually his girlfriend who'd obtained a notary license specifically for this transaction. She'd witnessed my signature while I was under the false impression I was signing trust documents. My attorney filed emergency motions to void the transfer, based on fraud and undue influence. She argued Brandon had exploited his position as both my trusted grandson and an attorney to deceive me into signing documents I didn't understand. She requested immediate injunction, preventing the property's sale until the fraud claims could be litigated. Brandon had planned this theft carefully. He'd accumulated significant personal debts and had targeted my house as a solution. He deliberately lied about the document's purpose, had brought a complicit notary to avoid independent verification, and had immediately moved to sell the property before I could discover the fraud. The court case took 6 months and was emotionally devastating. I had to testify about how my own grandson had deceived me, how I'd trusted him because of our relationship and his professional credentials, and how he'd exploited that trust to steal my home. Brandon showed no remorse during proceedings. He claimed I'd understood exactly what I was signing and had decided to gift him the house, then changed my mind afterward. He argued the documents were legally valid, regardless of what I claimed he'd told me about their purpose. The judge ruled in my favor, finding clear evidence of fraud and undue influence. The property transfer was voided and ownership reverted to me. The judge was particularly critical of Brandon's conduct as a licensed attorney, noting he'd violated professional ethics by deceiving a vulnerable client who was also his grandmother. I reported Brandon to the State Bar Association for professional misconduct. The ethics investigation resulted in Brandon being disbarred permanently. He can never practice law again due to the egregious fraud he committed against his own grandmother using his legal expertise. Brandon has sent occasional letters claiming he's sorry and was desperate due to his debts, but seeking no real accountability, just expressing regret he got caught and disbarred. His parents are horrified and have apologized repeatedly, though they struggle to comprehend how they raised someone capable of such calculated elder abuse. My relationship with Brandon's mother, my daughter, Helen, 54-year-old female, has survived but is strained. She feels tremendous guilt for Brandon's actions and has offered to help financially ensure I'm protected. But we both carry grief over what Brandon became and what he destroyed. I struggle daily with the betrayal. Brandon wasn't a distant relative I barely knew. He was the grandson I'd helped raise, whose education I'd funded, whose achievements I'd celebrated. I'd trusted him more than almost anyone because of our history, and because his law degree suggested professional integrity. The realization that someone I loved so deeply could look me in the eyes, lie to me about legal documents, and steal my home without hesitation has fundamentally altered how I view people. If Brandon could betray me that completely, who can I trust? I still live in my home, ownership secured after the legal battle, but it no longer feels like the safe haven it once was. It's the house my grandson tried to steal using the legal expertise I'd helped him obtain. Every room reminds me of his betrayal. Brandon's disbarment and the voided transfer feel like inadequate consequences for what he did. Yes, his legal career is destroyed, but he attempted to render his 77-year-old grandmother homeless to pay his gambling debts. He exploited professional credentials and family trust in ways that should haunt him forever, though I suspect he primarily regrets getting caught, rather than feeling genuine remorse for his cruelty. I'm grateful I discovered the theft before Brandon sold the house, which would have complicated recovery immensely. But I'll never recover what he truly stole: my ability to trust family members, my sense of safety in my own home, and my belief that the grandson I'd loved and supported would protect rather than exploit me. Those losses are permanent, regardless of legal outcomes. My grandson used my Holocaust survivor testimony to create NFTs he sold for profit. Digital archive. Those two modern words concealed my grandson, Nathan's, 26M, most despicable exploitation. He wasn't preserving my Holocaust testimony for educational purposes, as he claimed, but was converting my trauma into NFT artwork. He sold for $340,000 without my knowledge or consent. And I, 84 Famefeel, only discovered the commercialization when a history teacher emailed asking why my concentration camp memories were being sold as collectible digital art. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I was sent to Auschwitz at age 12 with my family in 1943. My parents and younger brother were murdered immediately upon arrival. I survived nearly 2 years in the camp through circumstances I still struggle to comprehend. After liberation, I rebuilt my life in America, but the trauma never fully healed. For 70 years, I rarely spoke about my experiences. The memories were too painful, too overwhelming. But about 3 years ago, Nathan approached me about participating in a Holocaust testimony project. He said he was working with a digital preservation initiative to record survivor testimonies before the last of us passed away. Nathan explained the project would create permanent digital archives of survivor stories, video interviews, photographs, personal artifacts, preserved in new digital formats that would ensure the testimonies survived for future generations. He spoke passionately about fighting Holocaust denial and ensuring younger generations understood what happened. I was deeply moved by Nathan's dedication to preservation and education. At 84, I knew my time to share my story was limited. I agreed to participate, hoping my testimony might educate people and honor the memory of my murdered family. Nathan conducted extensive interviews over 6 months. He recorded 20 hours of video testimony where I described the selection process at Auschwitz, watching my family taken to the gas chambers, the daily horror of camp life, liberation by Soviet forces, and my decades of survival guilt and PTSD. These interviews were profoundly difficult. I shared details I'd never told anyone: the specific ways guards brutalized prisoners, the starvation and disease, watching children murdered, the dehumanization designed to break our spirits. I cried through much of the recording, reliving trauma I'd spent 70 years trying to suppress. Nathan also photographed my concentration camp uniform that I'd somehow kept, my liberation papers, family photographs from before the war, and other artifacts I'd preserved. He said these would be digitally archived alongside my video testimony to create a comprehensive historical record. I trusted Nathan completely. He was my grandson, and he seemed genuinely committed to Holocaust education and memory preservation. When he asked me to sign release forms allowing him to preserve and share the materials in digital formats, I signed without hesitation, believing the forms authorized educational use. Then, 2 months ago, I received an email from a high school history teacher in California. She'd seen that Holocaust survivor testimony, NFTs, were being sold online, and was disturbed that my personal trauma was being commercialized. She asked if I'd authorized this use of my story, and whether proceeds were going to Holocaust education organizations. I had no idea what NFTs were. The teacher explained. Non-fungible tokens, digital collectibles people buy and trade like artwork or trading cards. She sent me links to a website where Nathan was selling limited edition Holocaust memory NFTs, featuring clips from my video testimony, images of my concentration camp uniform, and digital artwork incorporating my family photographs. The website described the NFTs as authentic Holocaust survivor memories preserved as collectible digital art. Prices ranged from $1,200 to $18,000 per NFT depending on rarity tier. Nathan had sold approximately 120 NFTs over 18 months, generating roughly $340,000. My testimony about watching my mother and brother murdered in gas chambers was being sold as $5,000 rare collectible. Images of my 12-year-old self in camp uniform were limited edition digital art, priced at $8,000. My family's Holocaust tragedy had been converted into profitable collectibles for cryptocurrency enthusiasts. I was physically ill discovering this. Nathan had exploited my trust and trauma to create commercial products from the worst experiences of my life. The Digital Preservation Initiative was entirely fabricated. There was no educational archive, just Nathan's NFT business selling Holocaust trauma for profit. When I confronted Nathan, he initially claimed the NFT sales were raising awareness about the Holocaust, and that commercialization helped reach younger audiences. But when I demanded he immediately cease sales and return all profits, he refused, claiming he'd invested significant work creating the digital art and had legal right to sell it based on the release forms I'd signed. I reviewed the release forms with an attorney. Nathan had deliberately used vague language about digital formats and sharing materials that could be interpreted as allowing commercial use. However, the forms never mentioned NFTs specifically, never disclosed commercial intent, and were obtained through deception about the project's purpose. My attorney filed immediate legal action for fraud, elder abuse, violation of publicity rights, and emotional distress. We also contacted the NFT marketplace hosting Nathan's sales, explaining the tokens were created through elder exploitation and Holocaust trauma commercialization without informed consent. The marketplace investigation led to Nathan's entire collection being removed and sales halted. Most NFT marketplaces have policies against exploitation and non-consensual use of personal trauma, particularly regarding Holocaust content. Nathan's account was permanently banned. Nathan was charged criminally with elder financial abuse and fraud. The case drew international media attention. The horrifying story of a grandson commercializing his Holocaust survivor grandmother's trauma as cryptocurrency collectibles shocked people globally. Holocaust education organizations and survivor advocacy groups condemned Nathan's actions as grotesque exploitation. Several organizations filed amicus briefs supporting my legal case. arguing that commercializing Holocaust testimony as digital collectibles trivializes genocide and exploits survivor trauma. Nathan pled guilty and received 3 years in prison, plus orders to pay $340,000 restitution, the full amount he'd earned from NFT sales. The judge emphasized that exploiting an elderly Holocaust survivor's testimony for cryptocurrency profit represented particularly egregious elder abuse and desecration of Holocaust memory. But legal consequences couldn't undo the violation. Strangers had purchased my trauma as collectible digital art. People had traded my memories of watching my family murdered as if they were baseball cards or artwork. My testimony, given in good faith for education, had been commercialized and degraded. The NFT buyers who'd purchased my trauma couldn't be forced to delete their purchases. The blockchain technology means those tokens exist permanently. Somewhere, people own digital collectibles of my 12-year-old self in concentration camp uniform, of my testimony about my mother's murder, of my family photos from before Nazis destroyed everything. My relationship with Nathan is destroyed permanently, and his parents, my daughter Rebecca, 58-year-old female, and her husband, are devastated and ashamed. Rebecca has apologized constantly and has tried to donate money to Holocaust education organizations in my name, but the damage can't be undone. What haunts me most is that I shared my testimony, believing it would educate people and honor my murdered family's memory. Instead, Nathan converted it into commercial products that trivialize the Holocaust. My mother and brother died in gas chambers at Auschwitz. Their memories don't belong as $8,000 collectible digital art for cryptocurrency traders. Holocaust survivors spend our final years trying to ensure the world remembers what happened, that genocide is never repeated, that our families' murders weren't meaningless. Nathan took that sacred mission and turned it into a get-rich-quick scheme, selling trauma as digital collectibles. I'm 84 years old. Most Holocaust survivors are gone. Our testimonies are precious historical records and sacred memories of murdered millions. That my grandson saw my testimony as raw material for cryptocurrency profit, rather than as sacred trust, shows a moral bankruptcy I can't comprehend or forgive. The $340,000 restitution Nathan owes will likely never be fully paid. But I've donated what has been recovered to legitimate Holocaust education organizations, turning Nathan's exploitation money into actual educational good. It's small redemption for massive violation. Some people have asked why I prosecuted Nathan, given he's young and made a mistake. But this wasn't a mistake. It was calculated exploitation of Holocaust trauma for profit. He deliberately deceived me, commercialized genocide, and showed no genuine remorse until facing consequences. That's unforgivable, regardless of age or family relationship. I'll die knowing my grandson sold my Holocaust memories as cryptocurrency collectibles. That knowledge compounds 70 years of survivor guilt and trauma. I survived Auschwitz, rebuilt my life, and tried to honor my family's memory through testimony. Nathan desecrated all of it for NFT profits. Some betrayals are so profound they can never be reconciled, even between grandmother and grandson. This is one of them. My grandson's charity fundraiser for my cancer treatment was a complete scam. Charity fundraiser. Those two compassionate words hid the most heartless betrayal. My grandson, Tyler, 29-year-old male, wasn't raising money to help pay for my cancer treatment as he claimed, but was pocketing every donation while I underwent chemotherapy, believing my medical bills were being covered by generous strangers. And I, 74-year-old female, only discovered the fraud when the hospital threatened collections for my $127,000 unpaid balance. When I was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 2 years ago, Tyler seemed devastated. He visited me in the hospital, held my hand during the diagnosis discussion, and promised to help however he could. As a graphic designer with social media expertise, he offered to create an online fundraising campaign to help with my medical expenses. I was touched by Tyler's initiative. My insurance covered some treatment costs, but copays, deductibles, and non-covered medications would create substantial bills. Tyler set up a campaign on a major crowdfunding platform with my photo, my cancer story, and a $150,000 goal for treatment expenses. Tyler's campaign was incredibly successful. He shared it extensively on social media, reached out to local media for coverage, and organized several fundraising events at local businesses. Within 6 months, the campaign had raised $183,000 from over 2,400 donors, strangers, friends, distant relatives, and community members who'd been moved by my story and wanted to help. Tyler would visit me during chemotherapy and share updates about the fundraising progress. He'd show me messages from donors wishing me well, tell me about new contributions, and reassure me that my medical bills would be fully covered. I was overwhelmed by the generosity of so many people and felt blessed to have such a devoted grandson orchestrating this support. Throughout 18 months of treatment, I focused on fighting cancer rather than worrying about finances. Tyler assured me repeatedly that donations were covering everything, that I should concentrate on healing, and that he was handling all the medical billing coordination. I trusted him completely. Then 3 months after completing treatment and achieving remission, I received a letter from the hospital's collections department. I owed $127,000 for treatment costs. The letter threatened legal action if payment arrangements weren't made immediately. There had to be a mistake. Tyler had raised over $180,000 specifically for these bills. I called Tyler, panicked, explaining the collections letter. He seemed confused and said he'd look into it, claiming there must be administrative confusion about how payments were applied. He promised to contact the hospital and resolve the issue. Days passed with no resolution. The hospital confirmed they'd received 0 payments from any fundraising campaign. All my treatment bills remained unpaid and were being sent to collections. When I pressed Tyler for explanations, he became evasive, then stopped returning my calls entirely. I accessed the crowdfunding campaign page and noticed the funds had been withdrawn completely, transferred to Tyler's bank account over the course of the fundraising period. I contacted the platform's fraud department and requested transaction records. They confirmed $183,000 had been donated to my campaign, and Tyler had withdrawn every cent to his personal account, claiming he was transferring it to pay my medical expenses. But Tyler had never paid a single medical bill. He'd withdrawn the donations and spent the money on himself. I discovered through his social media that over the 18 months of my cancer treatment, Tyler had taken luxury vacations, purchased a new car, made substantial renovations to his home, and funded an extravagant lifestyle, all using money that 2,400 people had donated, believing they were helping a grandmother fight cancer. The betrayal was incomprehensible. Tyler had watched me undergo chemotherapy, had held my hand during treatments, had listened to me express gratitude for the donor's generosity, all while knowing he'd stolen every dollar donated for my care. He'd exploited my cancer and strangers' compassion to fund 18 months of luxury living. I reported Tyler to police for fraud and theft. The investigation revealed he'd spent the $183,000 on a $35,000 car, $48,000 in home renovations, $42,000 on vacations and entertainment, $31,000 on designer clothing and electronics, and the remainder on general living expenses and paying off personal debts. Not a single dollar had gone toward my cancer treatment. Tyler was arrested and charged with multiple counts of felony fraud, theft, and wire fraud, since the crowdfunding involved interstate transactions. The case drew significant media attention because of the particularly egregious nature of stealing cancer treatment funds from his own grandmother. Many original donors contacted media outlets expressing devastation and rage. They'd contributed believing they were helping an elderly woman survive cancer, only to learn her grandson had stolen their donations to buy luxury items. Several donors organized a second fundraising campaign, this time managed by a professional foundation, to help pay my actual medical bills. Tyler pled guilty to avoid trial and received a 7-year prison sentence plus restitution orders. However, he'd spent nearly all the stolen money, and I'll likely never recover more than a fraction. The hospital eventually agreed to a payment plan I can barely afford on my retirement income, and the second fundraising campaign helped but didn't fully cover the debt. My family fractured completely over the situation. Tyler's parents, my daughter Rachel, 51-year-old female, and her husband, Dennis, 53-year-old male, were devastated and humiliated. Rachel has apologized repeatedly and tried to help financially, but the betrayal damaged our relationship. She feels tremendous guilt for raising someone capable of such cruelty. Some extended family members blamed me for prosecuting Tyler, saying I was destroying his future and should have handled it privately. They argued that since I survived cancer, I should be grateful for recovery, rather than vindictive about the money. This response showed how some people valued family loyalty over basic ethics and accountability. The 7 years Tyler will spend in prison seem simultaneously too much and too little. Yes, he's young, and this will devastate his future prospects. But he deliberately stole from cancer patients and exploited his dying grandmother's situation for personal luxury. He showed no remorse until facing legal consequences, only entitlement and expectation that family would protect him from accountability. Most painfully, I can never fully trust expressions of care or support again. Tyler had seemed genuinely concerned during my cancer treatment, visiting regularly, appearing emotional and supportive, expressing love, all while stealing money donated for my survival. If my own grandson could fake that level of care while committing such betrayal, how can I trust anyone's apparent compassion? The generous strangers who donated to my campaign were betrayed alongside me, and that compounds my guilt and shame. People gave money they probably couldn't easily spare because they believed in helping an elderly woman fight cancer. Tyler stole their generosity and compassion along with their money. I feel responsible for their exploitation, even though I was victimized equally. My son convinced nursing home staff I had dementia so he could control my assets. Medical evaluation. Those two clinical words became my son, Phillips, 53 Yale, tool for stealing my independence. He wasn't concerned about my cognitive health as he claimed, but was bribing nursing home staff to falsify dementia assessments so he could obtain guardianship and control my $1.2 million estate. And I, 79-year-old female, only discovered the conspiracy when a conscientious nurse asked why I was being evaluated for dementia when my cognitive function appeared completely normal. I've lived independently and actively for my entire life. At 79, I still drove, managed my finances, volunteered at the library, maintained my home, and had an active social life. I had no cognitive issues beyond normal age-related memory variations. My doctor confirmed at my annual physical 6 months ago that I showed no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. Philip started expressing concerns about my memory problems about 8 months ago during his monthly visits. He'd claim I'd forgotten conversations we'd had or appointments I'd supposedly missed. When I'd dispute his claims, he'd say gently that memory issues often prevent people from recognizing their own decline. His concerns seemed genuine, if misplaced. Philip suggested I move into an independent living community for safety and social engagement. He'd researched a facility called Meadowbrook Senior Living that offered various care levels. I could start in independent living, he said, and transition to higher care if needed. Philip spoke enthusiastically about the activities, the community, and how it would give me peace of mind. I resisted initially, feeling I didn't need institutional living. But Philip was persistent, saying he worried about me being alone, that something could happen without anyone knowing. Eventually, his concern wore down my resistance. I agreed to tour Meadowbrook and consider it. The facility seemed pleasant enough, clean, well-staffed, with active programming. Philip had apparently already completed paperwork and paid deposits during the tour, which seemed presumptuous, but he explained he wanted to secure availability in case I decided to move in. I agreed to try Meadowbrook for a trial period of 3 months. Philip helped me move a few weeks later, assuring me I could return home any time if I didn't like it. Within days of arriving at Meadowbrook, staff began treating me strangely. Nurses would ask basic orientation questions constantly. Do you know what day it is? Do you remember where you are? Activities staff would speak slowly and simply, as if I were cognitively impaired. Meals were served with supervision, as if I couldn't manage eating independently. After 2 weeks, a nurse I hadn't met before, Jennifer, pulled me aside privately. She seemed uncomfortable and said, "Mrs. Wallace, I need to ask you something. Your intake paperwork says you have moderate dementia and require memory care monitoring. But in my interactions with you, you seem completely cognitively intact. Can you explain this discrepancy?" I was shocked. I told Jennifer I had no dementia diagnosis and had moved to Meadowbrook for social reasons, not medical necessity. Jennifer showed me my medical file. It contained falsified cognitive assessments showing I'd scored poorly on dementia screening tests I'd never taken. Notes claimed I had significant memory impairment, confusion about time and place, and inability to manage finances or medical decisions. Jennifer explained that based on these falsified assessments, Meadowbrook staff had been treating me as a dementia patient. Philip had also filed for emergency guardianship, using the falsified medical records as evidence I was mentally incompetent and needed a legal guardian to manage my affairs. I was horrified and demanded to see the administrator. The investigation revealed a conspiracy. Philip had paid Meadowbrook's intake coordinator $15,000 to falsify my medical assessments and create documentation showing dementia. The coordinator had fabricated test results, forged physician signatures, and created a medical file that would support Philip's guardianship petition. Philip's guardianship petition was already pending in court, scheduled for hearing in 2 weeks. If granted, he'd have complete control over my finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. I'd lose all legal autonomy based on fraudulent dementia diagnoses. The motivation was purely financial. As my guardian, Philip would control my $1.2 million estate, my house, savings, investments, everything. He could sell assets, spend money, and make decisions without my consent. Philip had accumulated significant gambling debts and saw guardianship as a way to access my money while rendering me powerless to object. I immediately hired an attorney who filed emergency motions to halt the guardianship proceedings and obtained independent cognitive evaluations from multiple neurologists. Every evaluation confirmed I had no dementia or cognitive impairment. I was mentally competent and had been fraudulently diagnosed. I reported Philip and the Meadowbrook intake coordinator to law enforcement. The investigation uncovered the conspiracy. Philip had approached the coordinator months before my move, offered payment for falsified assessments, and had coordinated the guardianship plan. Several other families had been similarly victimized. The coordinator had falsified assessments for multiple residents whose relatives sought guardianship for financial control. Philip was charged with attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and bribery. The Meadowbrook coordinator faced charges of fraud, falsifying medical records, and elder abuse. Both pled guilty. Philip received 4 years in prison. The coordinator received 6 years plus permanent loss of medical credentials. Meadowbrook Senior Living faced civil lawsuits from multiple families whose relatives had been fraudulently diagnosed. The facility ultimately closed after settlements and loss of licensing. Several residents who'd been wrongly placed in memory care based on falsified assessments were freed to return to independent living or their homes. I moved back to my home immediately after the fraud was discovered. I obtained court orders confirming my mental competence and blocking any future guardianship attempts. I changed my will to ensure Philip would inherit nothing after attempting to steal my autonomy and assets. My relationship with Philip is permanently destroyed. He'd been willing to have me institutionalized based on fabricated dementia, to strip my legal rights through fraudulent guardianship, and to control my life and finances for his gambling debts. That's beyond forgiveness. Philip's children, my grandchildren ages 17 and 14, were devastated learning their father had tried to fraudulently institutionalize their grandmother. They've maintained contact with me, but carry shame and confusion about their father's crimes. Our relationship survived, but bears the weight of Philip's betrayal. Some family members suggested I was too harsh prosecuting Philip, that I should have handled it privately since the guardianship was ultimately blocked. But Philip had committed serious felonies: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to deprive me of legal rights. Those crimes warranted prosecution regardless of family bonds. The psychological violation of being treated as cognitively impaired when I was completely competent was profoundly damaging. Staff spoke to me as if I were a child. Activities were designed for people with severe dementia. I was monitored constantly as if I couldn't be trusted. The 2 weeks I spent at Meadowbrook before Jennifer exposed the fraud were humiliating and dehumanizing. The knowledge that Philip had planned this for months, researching facilities, bribing staff, filing guardianship paperwork, while pretending concern for my well-being, is particularly painful. Every expression of worry had been manipulation. Every suggestion about my memory problems had been gaslighting, designed to make me doubt my own competence. I'm now 80, living independently with additional legal protections against future guardianship attempts. I have cognitive evaluations documenting my competence, updated powers of attorney naming trustees other than Philip, and court orders blocking his access to my medical or financial information. But I'll never fully recover from the violation of nearly being institutionalized and legally declared incompetent based on lies. Philip didn't just attempt financial theft. He attempted to steal my autonomy, dignity, and legal personhood. That I discovered the fraud in time doesn't erase the trauma of what he'd planned and nearly accomplished. The nurse Jennifer who questioned my fraudulent diagnosis potentially saved my life, or at least my freedom and independence. If she hadn't noticed the discrepancy between my actual cognition and my falsified medical file, Philip's guardianship might have been granted. I'd have spent my final years institutionalized, legally incompetent, watching my son spend my money while I was powerless to object. Philip will serve 4 years in prison, then face decades of estrangement from his mother and children. He destroyed his family relationships, his freedom, and his inheritance for gambling debts he thought he could pay with my stolen assets. Those consequences are permanent and deserved. Some betrayals, especially attempting to steal a parent's legal personhood, are utterly unforgivable. My son secretly replaced my medications with placebos to speed up my decline. Prescription refills. Those 2 routine words masked my son Kenneth's, 46 mil male, most sinister betrayal. He wasn't helping me manage my medications as he claimed, but was secretly replacing my heart medication and blood pressure pills with sugar tablets to accelerate my health decline so he could obtain power of attorney faster. And I, 78 mil male, only discovered the tampering when my pharmacist noticed the pills I brought in for identification didn't match what they'd dispensed. I have several serious health conditions requiring daily medication: congestive heart failure, high blood pressure, diabetes, and atrial fibrillation. Proper medication adherence is literally life or death for someone with my conditions. Missing doses or taking incorrect medications could trigger heart attack, stroke, or fatal arrhythmia within days. Kenneth lives nearby and has been extraordinarily helpful since my wife died 3 years ago. He'd take me to medical appointments, pick up my prescriptions, organize my pill organizer weekly, and generally manage my healthcare coordination. I was grateful for his support and trusted him completely with something as critical as my medication management. About 8 months ago, I started feeling progressively worse. My blood pressure readings were dangerously high despite medication. My heart palpitations increased in frequency and severity. I felt weak, dizzy, and short of breath constantly. My cardiologist was confused because my symptoms suggested my medications weren't working, but I insisted I was taking them exactly as prescribed. My doctor increased dosages and added additional medications, but my condition continued deteriorating. I had 2 emergency room visits for chest pain and dangerously elevated blood pressure. Each time, doctors were puzzled because my symptoms indicated medication non-compliance. But I absolutely was taking my pills daily from the organizer Kenneth filled. Over 6 months, my health declined dramatically. I went from relatively stable with managed conditions to critically ill, barely able to function. Kenneth expressed deep concern and started discussing the possibility that I might need assisted living or nursing home care soon if my health continued declining. Kenneth also suggested we should establish power of attorney just in case my health deteriorated to the point I couldn't make medical or financial decisions. He had documents prepared by his attorney and encouraged me to sign them to ensure someone could manage my affairs if I became incapacitated. I was too sick and confused to question Kenneth's suggestions. My declining health made the power of attorney seem prudent. I nearly signed the documents, but my daughter Helen, 43 female, happened to visit from out of state and insisted I wait until she could review them with her own attorney. Then 2 weeks ago, I experienced severe chest pain and arrhythmia. Kenneth wasn't available, so Helen rushed me to the emergency room herself. The ER doctor asked to see all my medications to check for dangerous interactions. Helen brought my pill organizer and the prescription bottles Kenneth had picked up from the pharmacy. The ER doctor examined the pills and said something seemed wrong. The physical appearance didn't match what the labels indicated they should be. The hospital pharmacist was called to examine the medications. After testing several pills from my organizer, she made a shocking discovery. The pills weren't my prescribed medications at all. My heart medication had been replaced with vitamin C tablets. My blood pressure pills were sugar pills. My diabetes medication was replaced with harmless supplements. Nearly all my critical medications, the ones keeping me alive, had been systematically replaced with placebos. Only my less critical medications like vitamins and allergy pills remained authentic. Someone had deliberately switched my life-sustaining medications with harmless substitutes. Helen immediately suspected Kenneth since he was the only person who handled my medications and prescriptions. We filed a police report, and investigators obtained the authentic medications from my pharmacy for comparison with what was in my home. The investigation confirmed deliberate medication tampering. Kenneth had been picking up my real prescriptions, then replacing the critical medications with look-alike placebos before filling my weekly pill organizer. He'd been doing this for approximately 8 months, exactly matching the timeline of my mysterious health decline. Kenneth's motivation became clear when investigators found the power of attorney documents on his computer, along with emails to financial advisors discussing when Dad becomes incapacitated and how to manage my $680,000 estate after the POA is established. Kenneth had been deliberately sabotaging my medications to accelerate my health decline, hoping I'd become incapacitated quickly so he could obtain power of attorney and control my assets. He'd been willing to risk killing me. Heart failure patients can die within days without proper medication, to gain access to my money faster. Kenneth was arrested and charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. The charges were extremely serious because he deliberately withheld life-sustaining medication from someone with critical heart conditions, creating substantial risk of death. During the investigation, medical experts testified that going 8 months without proper heart failure and blood pressure medication should have killed me. The fact I survived was remarkable luck, but I'd suffered permanent heart damage from the prolonged medication deprivation that Kenneth had deliberately caused. Kenneth initially tried to claim the medication switches were accidental errors, but the systematic replacement of only critical medications while leaving non-essential ones authentic proved deliberate intent. The emails discussing my estate and power of attorney established clear financial motive. Kenneth pled guilty to avoid trial and received a 12-year prison sentence for attempted murder and elder abuse. The judge emphasized that deliberately withholding life-sustaining medication from someone with severe heart conditions constituted attempted murder, regardless of Kenneth's claims he didn't mean for me to die, just to decline enough to need a guardian. However, Kenneth's incarceration doesn't reverse the permanent damage. My heart suffered months of deterioration without proper medication. My cardiologist says I've lost years of life expectancy and will have significantly reduced cardiac function permanently. Kenneth's medication tampering caused irreversible damage that will likely shorten my life considerably. My relationship with Kenneth is destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. My own son was willing to kill me slowly through medication deprivation to access my estate earlier than natural inheritance would allow. He watched me suffer through emergency room visits, chest pain, and progressive decline, all caused by his deliberate sabotage, while pretending concern and pushing power of attorney documents. Helen has moved nearby to help manage my care and ensure my medications are authentic and properly administered. She's traumatized by discovering her brother was attempting to murder their father, and she carries guilt for not visiting more frequently in the months before she discovered the tampering. Kenneth's children, my grandchildren ages 14 and 11, lost their father to prison for attempting to murder their grandfather. They're in intensive therapy processing the trauma, and their relationship with their mother is strained because she initially defended Kenneth before evidence became overwhelming. Some extended family members have suggested Kenneth deserves some understanding because he was under financial stress and made terrible choices but didn't actually kill me. But Kenneth's financial stress doesn't justify deliberately withholding life-sustaining medication from his critically ill father. He attempted murder for inheritance money. The permanent heart damage I've suffered means Kenneth's attempt wasn't entirely unsuccessful. He did shorten my life, just not as quickly or dramatically as he'd hoped. Every struggling heartbeat for my remaining years is partly caused by his deliberate medication sabotage. I'm now 79, living with permanent cardiac damage and shortened life expectancy because my son systematically replaced my medications with placebos for 8 months. Professional caregivers now manage all my medications with multiple verification systems to prevent tampering. The $680,000 estate Kenneth wanted to control through power of attorney will be donated to cardiac research upon my death. Kenneth will inherit nothing. Appropriate consequences for someone who attempted to murder his father for money. My will explicitly disinherits him and explains why, ensuring future generations understand what he did. Kenneth will serve 12 years in prison, then live the rest of his life as a convicted attempted murderer who tried to kill his own father by withholding heart medication. His professional reputation is destroyed, his marriage ended in divorce, and his children barely speak to him. But those consequences can't restore my damaged heart, or the years of life Kenneth's tampering cost me. The permanent cardiac damage means I'll likely die sooner because my son valued $680,000 more than his father's life. That betrayal is unforgivable, and knowing he's my son makes it even more devastating. Some betrayals permanently sever all family bonds. deliberately replacing your critically ill father's life-sustaining medications with placebos to accelerate his decline so you can control his money. That's one of them. Kenneth made his choice when he first switched my heart pills for vitamin C. Now he lives with the consequences. 12 years in prison, permanent estrangement from his father, and the knowledge that he nearly succeeded in murdering me for inheritance money. My son used my identity to take out $220,000 in loans I knew nothing about. Credit application. Those two routine words became my son, Vincent's, 44, male, weapon to destroy my financial security. He wasn't helping me organize paperwork, as he claimed, but was stealing my personal information to fraudulently open credit cards, personal loans, and a home equity line in my name. And I, 76M, only discovered his identity theft when debt collectors started calling about accounts I'd never opened that were now $220,000 in default. Vincent had always struggled financially. Multiple failed business ventures, 2 bankruptcies, and poor decision-making left him with destroyed credit and limited borrowing ability. I'd helped him financially over the years, paid his rent during hard times, loaned him money for emergencies, co-signed for apartments when his credit was too damaged. About 3 years ago, Vincent offered to help me organize my financial documents and modernize my record-keeping. He said everything should be digitized and properly filed in case of emergencies. As someone who still kept paper files and handwritten records, I appreciated Vincent's offer to help me enter the digital age. Vincent spent several weekends at my house going through file cabinets, scanning documents, and setting up what he called a comprehensive digital filing system. He asked for my social security card, birth certificate, bank statements, tax returns, and other personal documents, saying he needed to scan everything for complete records. I trusted Vincent completely and gave him access to all my personal information. He'd take documents home to scan with better equipment, returning them a few days later. He set up password-protected files on my computer and showed me how to access them, though the technology was beyond my comfort level, and I mostly relied on Vincent to manage it. Over the following 2 years, I noticed nothing unusual. My bank accounts remained stable. My retirement income continued as expected, and my financial situation seemed secure. I had no reason to suspect Vincent was doing anything besides helping organize my paperwork. Then, 6 months ago, I started receiving calls from debt collection agencies about accounts I didn't recognize. First, it was a credit card company, saying I was 3 months behind on an $18,000 balance. Then a personal loan servicer claiming I owed $45,000 on a loan I'd never taken out. I insisted there was a mistake. I'd never opened these accounts. But the collectors had detailed information: my social security number, my address, my date of birth, my employment history. The accounts were definitely in my name, opened over the past 2 years with my personal information. I obtained my credit report and was devastated to discover 7 credit cards, 3 personal loans, and a home equity line of credit, all opened in my name between 18 months and 3 years ago. The combined debt totaled approximately $220,000, and every account was in default with missed payments dating back months. The timeline was clear. Vincent had used the personal information I'd given him during our document organization project to fraudulently open accounts in my name. While I thought he was helping me digitize my records, he was actually stealing my identity to obtain credit he couldn't get in his own name. I confronted Vincent with my credit report. He initially tried to deny knowledge, suggesting someone had hacked my information. But when I threatened to report identity theft to police, he admitted what he'd done. He claimed he'd been desperate and had planned to repay everything before I found out. He said he'd only meant to borrow temporarily and had never intended for accounts to go into default. Vincent's explanations were pathetic. He'd stolen my identity to obtain $220,000 in credit, had maxed out every account, had made no payments once promotional periods ended, and had let everything default while hiding statements and calls from me. He'd spent the money on failed business ventures, gambling debts, and general living expenses. The home equity line was particularly devastating. Vincent had used my house as collateral for a $75,000 loan. If that loan wasn't resolved, I could lose my home of 40 years. Vincent had literally put my housing security at risk to fund his irresponsible spending. I reported Vincent to police for identity theft and fraud. The investigation confirmed he'd systematically stolen my personal information and had opened numerous accounts using forged signatures and falsified applications. The evidence was overwhelming. IP addresses from Vincent's home, email confirmations sent to accounts he controlled, and eventually, his own confession. Vincent was arrested and charged with multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and elder financial abuse. He pled guilty to avoid trial and received a 4-year prison sentence, plus restitution orders requiring him to repay the full $220,000, plus legal fees and credit repair costs. However, Vincent had no assets and no realistic ability to repay such amounts. The restitution order exists legally, but practically is meaningless. He'll make minimal court-ordered payments for years that will barely cover interest, let alone principal. Meanwhile, I faced the devastating consequences of Vincent's identity theft. Creditors were pursuing me for debts I didn't incur. My credit score had dropped from 780 to 420. The home equity line put my house at immediate foreclosure risk. I hired attorneys who helped me file identity theft affidavits with all creditors, police reports documenting Vincent's fraud, and disputes with credit bureaus. The process was grueling. Dozens of hours providing documentation, countless calls with creditors, ongoing stress about potential lawsuits or foreclosure. Most creditors eventually accepted the identity theft documentation and closed accounts without requiring payment from me. But the home equity line was more complicated. The lender had done minimal verification and had arguably been negligent in approving a $75,000 loan to a 73-year-old retiree with limited income. My attorneys negotiated a settlement where the lender forgave the debt in exchange for avoiding a lawsuit over their inadequate verification procedures. After 18 months of legal battles, most debts were resolved without my payment. My credit report was corrected to remove fraudulent accounts, but the damage was profound and lasting. My credit score recovered to only 650, better than during the crisis, but permanently damaged. I now face higher insurance rates, limited credit access, and ongoing financial complications from Vincent's identity theft. My relationship with Vincent is permanently destroyed. He exploited my trust during what I thought was a helpful family project to commit systematic identity theft. He put my home at risk, destroyed my credit, and created years of stress and legal battles, all to fund his irresponsible spending and gambling. Vincent's 2 adult children, my grandchildren, have apologized repeatedly for their father's actions, but our relationship is strained by the association. They're embarrassed and angry at Vincent, but also devastated by his incarceration. They've tried to maintain connection with me, but every interaction reminds us all of what Vincent did. Some family members suggested I shouldn't have prosecuted Vincent, that I should have worked out private repayment arrangements and kept it within the family. But Vincent committed serious felonies that could have rendered me homeless. He showed no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught, and anger that creditors wouldn't accept his temporary borrowing justification. I'm now 77, living in the home Vincent nearly caused me to lose. I've implemented extreme security measures, frozen credit, fraud alerts, document safeguards. But I can never fully relax, knowing my own son was willing to steal my identity and potentially render me homeless to fund his irresponsible lifestyle. The financial recovery is mostly complete, but I'll never recover what Vincent truly stole, my sense of security and my ability to trust family members with personal information. I now handle all my own paperwork despite the difficulty, unwilling to risk similar betrayal. Vincent didn't just steal money. He stole my peace of mind, permanently. The 4 years Vincent will spend in prison seems simultaneously too much and too little. Yes, he's my son, and incarceration is devastating. But he committed calculated elder abuse that could have destroyed my financial security and housing in my final years. That deserves serious consequences, regardless of family bonds. I sometimes wonder if I failed as a parent, if something in how I raised Vincent made him capable of such betrayal. But ultimately, Vincent was 41 years old when he began this fraud. Old enough to understand he was committing serious crimes against his elderly father. His choices belong to him, not to my parenting decades earlier. I'll die before seeing meaningful restitution from Vincent's court-ordered payments. But prosecution was never about financial recovery. It was about accountability for exploiting parental trust to commit identity theft that jeopardized my housing and security. Some betrayals sever family bonds permanently, even between father and son. My son's home care business used me as unpaid labor while billing insurance. Employment opportunity. Those two promising words masked my son Derek's, 47 male, exploitation scheme. He wasn't giving me meaningful work to stay active in retirement as he claimed, but was forcing me to provide full-time care to his home health clients while he billed insurance $85 per hour for my labor and paid me nothing. And I, 71-year-old female, only discovered the fraud when one of his clients asked why I wasn't getting paid when the insurance statements showed charges for certified caregiver services. Derek started his home healthcare business 3 years ago, providing in-home assistance to elderly and disabled clients. He'd hired several caregivers and seemed to be building a legitimate, successful company. I was proud of him for creating a business that helped vulnerable people. About 14 months ago, Derek approached me with what seemed like a thoughtful offer. He said his business was expanding, and he wanted to offer me part-time work as a caregiver. It would give me structure and purpose in retirement, keep me active and social, and provide supplemental income. He said I'd be perfect because of my nurturing personality and life experience caring for family. I was touched by Derek's offer and agreed enthusiastically. He explained he'd start me with training shifts, where I'd shadow experienced caregivers to learn proper procedures. These training shifts would be unpaid initially, but once I completed training, I'd earn $18 per hour, standard rate for home health aides in our area. The training period lasted 3 weeks. I'd accompany Derek's caregivers to client homes, learning how to assist with bathing, medication management, meal preparation, and mobility support. The work was physically demanding but rewarding. I enjoyed helping people and felt I was learning valuable skills. After training, Derek assigned me to regular clients. I'd visit 3 different elderly clients daily, providing 4 hours of care to each. 12-hour days, 5 days per week. The work was exhausting but felt meaningful. I was helping people maintain independence and dignity in their homes. Weeks passed, then months, and I'd received no payment from Derek. When I asked about my first paycheck, he'd say there were delays with payroll processing or insurance reimbursements hadn't come through yet. He promised I'd be paid retroactively once the administrative issues resolved. I trusted Derek and continued working, assuming the payment delays were legitimate business complications. I worked for 14 months without receiving a single dollar. Nearly 3,500 hours of full-time caregiving labor completely unpaid. Then, one of my regular clients, Mrs. Patterson, 82-year-old female, showed me her insurance statement during one of my visits. She was reviewing her bills and seemed confused about charges. The statement showed her insurance had been billed $85 per hour for certified home health aid services for every hour I'd provided care, approximately $297,500 over the 14 months I'd worked with her and other clients. Mrs. Patterson asked innocently, "Dear, do you get paid well for this work?" These rates seem quite high. I explained I actually hadn't been paid yet due to administrative delays. Mrs. Patterson looked shocked and said, "But your son's company has been billing my insurance $85 per hour for your services for over a year. Where is that money going if not to you?" I was stunned. Derek had been billing insurance companies $85 per hour for my caregiving labor while paying me nothing. Over 14 months with 3 clients daily, Derek had collected approximately $890,000 from insurance for my work alone, not counting what he billed for his other caregivers. I confronted Derek with the insurance statements. He initially tried to claim the charges included overhead, administrative costs, and benefits. But I'd received no benefits, no workers' compensation coverage, and no payment whatsoever. Derek had been billing insurance for certified caregiver services while using his unpaid mother as free labor. The truth emerged. Derek had never intended to pay me. The training period had been a ruse to get me working without immediate payment expectations. The ongoing payroll delays were lies to keep me working unpaid indefinitely. Derek had been systematically exploiting me, billing insurance nearly $900,000 for my labor while keeping all proceeds. When I demanded immediate payment for 14 months of work, Derek claimed I'd been volunteering and that he'd never formally employed me. He said the training had been informal family help, not employment, and he had no legal obligation to pay me. I reported Derek to both law enforcement and insurance fraud investigators. The investigation uncovered systematic fraud. Derek had been billing insurance for certified caregiver services provided by me, but I had no certifications, no formal training, and no employment contract. He'd falsified credentials and billing codes to charge premium rates for unlicensed, unpaid labor. Derek had also done this with other family members and acquaintances. His ex-wife, his sister, and several family friends had all worked as unpaid caregivers, while Derek billed insurance for their services. He'd collected over $2.3 million in fraudulent insurance billing over 3 years using unpaid workers. Derek was charged with insurance fraud, labor law violations, and elder financial abuse for exploiting me specifically. He pled guilty to avoid trial and received an 8-year prison sentence. His business was permanently shut down, his professional licenses revoked, and he was ordered to repay all fraudulent billings plus penalties. However, Derek had spent most of the money on luxury purchases, real estate investments, and high living expenses. Actual restitution to me and other exploited workers would be minimal. Insurance companies recovered some assets through civil proceedings, but individual victims like me received only a fraction of what we were owed. I'd worked 3,500 hours unpaid, while Derek collected $890,000, billing insurance for my labor. Even at the promised $18 an hour, I was owed $63,000 minimum. At fair market rate of $85 per hour that Derek charged, I was owed the full $890,000. I eventually recovered approximately $12,000 through restitution payments, less than 2% of what Derek had collected from my labor. My relationship with Derek is permanently destroyed. He'd exploited his elderly mother's desire for meaningful retirement work to create unpaid labor he could fraudulently bill to insurance. He'd lied to me for 14 months while systematically stealing from both me and insurance companies. Derek's children, my grandchildren, ages 18 and 15, were horrified by their father's crimes. They'd believed Derek was running a legitimate business and were devastated learning he'd been committing fraud and exploiting their grandmother. Our relationship survived, but carries the weight of Derek's betrayal. Some family members suggested I was too harsh prosecuting Derek, that I should have handled it privately and allowed him to repay the owed wages over time. But Derek had committed serious felonies, insurance fraud, and systematic exploitation of unpaid workers, including his elderly mother. Those crimes warranted prosecution, regardless of family bonds. The physical toll of 14 months of unpaid 12-hour days has lasting effects. I'm 72 now, and dealing with chronic back pain, knee problems, and exhaustion that my doctor attributes to the prolonged physical labor without adequate rest or compensation. Derek's exploitation didn't just steal my wages, it damaged my health. The clients I cared for were also victims. They believed they were receiving services from certified, properly compensated professionals. Instead, Derek was providing unlicensed care through unpaid workers while charging premium rates. Several clients felt betrayed and worried about the quality of care they'd received. Mrs. Patterson, whose insurance statement exposed Derek's fraud, has apologized repeatedly for her insurance being used to exploit me. She feels tremendous guilt, though she was as much a victim as I was. We've maintained friendship, bonded through our mutual victimization by Derek's scheme. I'm proud I reported Derek, despite the family fracture. His fraud was systematic and involved millions in stolen insurance funds. If I'd handled it privately, he'd have continued exploiting others. Prosecution protected future victims and held Derek accountable for serious crimes. But I'll never recover the 14 months Derek stole. Time I could have spent actually enjoying retirement instead of working 12-hour days without pay. I'll never fully recover physically from the labor he extracted through lies. And I'll never recover my trust in family members who offer opportunities that seem too good to be true. Derek will serve 8 years in prison, then face years of restitution payments and professional blacklisting. He destroyed his career, his freedom, and his family relationships for money he's already spent. Those consequences are permanent, and they're deserved. Some betrayals, especially of one's elderly mother, are unforgivable regardless of blood relations.